I have the clicker by your seat over there, I believe, Dawn. So if you want to,
Tired because I got into a binge watch mode last night. It's kind of it's a sci-fi.
safe and sound. Reach for me. Should have known right away
Councilmember McClymans?
when it felt
I'm here.
too good
Okay, we
to
can hear
be
you.
true.
It'll be 2 minutes.
'Cause you
Okay, thank
never
you.
said what you mean to say. So anyway, you look at it, I'm confused. If you can see where this is gonna lead, reach for me. Don't wanna wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. Come on, reach for me. I can't wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. We'll be safe and sound. Reach for me. Reach for me. Got it all figured out. You decide what's best for you. 'Cause you built me up, so don't let me down. I can't make you do what you don't want to. If you can see where this is gonna lead, reach for me. Don't wanna wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. Come on, reach for me. I can't wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. We'll be safe and sound. Reach for me. Come on, reach for me. Don't wanna wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. Come on, reach for me. I can't wait another day without you. Take me to higher ground. We'll be safe and sound. Reach for me. Reach for me.
Waiting for council member. Well, good afternoon. Those of us who are watching us from online means, we want to thank you for this potential inconvenience in not allowing you to be in here. I'm sure you understand concerning everything else that's going on. We're starting off with a workshop on our budget workshop, number 2. And we're glad I see that we have all of our council either here, and Councilmember McClymans is at home right now. He's engaged with us telephonically. Hello, Councilmember McClymans. He's
I
muted.
can't hear you very well.
All right, good, glad to hear. So at this point, I'd like to call our meeting of budget workshop number 2 to order and turn this over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Do appreciate this is a little bit different setup from our usual budget workshop setups that we have in the other room, but we're going to try today to obviously get feedback from the council regarding next year's budget. Before we do that, though, I did want to talk about a few things. So as you know, today is the second budget workshop and actually our third meeting with council to get policy direction around the fiscal year 2021 budget. Chandler has always been a conservative community, and we all take that very seriously. Even in the Great Recession, Chandler was the only city that did not lay off employees, and here we are 12 years later, and with the growth in population and land area, we are still operating with 70 positions less than we did before the Great Recession. Remember, we are lean, and we're very proud of that. That being said, we need to take a strategic, balanced approach for the next year's budget and to remember that this is a plan. The plan does not have to be executed, and time will tell what the current situation does to our economy. In your last week's packet, there was a look at the global market as it stands right now. Economic development staff put that together at my request to get an early indicator as to what the COVID-19 is going to do on our economy. As we know, this is changing every day, and we continue to monitor that. As part of what we will present today for next year's budget, it includes a reduction in primary property tax by 0.8 of 1 penny from 0.2581 to 0.2501. Operational expenditures will remain at or below the current fiscal year. Measures have been taken to spend one-time dollars to free up ongoing dollars, and we have captured ongoing to be held and spent in the future if capital projects are funded. We are, we believe, one of only 2 cities to actually plan as part of our current budget and the proposed budget a forecasted recession. The folder that I have right here, and I can't miss that color, contains information that I required directors to submit to me on March the 2nd, prior to the COVID virus affecting our economy and what cuts and programs could be made if need be. We are ahead of the curve. We also want to discuss the 10-year capital plan that includes all the projects that you have asked for as part of the budget kickoff back in December. Before we get started, though, I also wanted to remind you of what is currently taking place in the organization. First of all open positions are currently being held. I have 83 vacancies in the organization right now that equates to over $5 million in ongoing that is being held. No travel for city employees, and reviewing all purchases to determine need. And on your dais tonight, I will be pulling 2 items from the agenda, including item 37, the purchase of vehicles, and item 38, purchase of tires. These will be further reviewed, and we'll bring those back in the future. We have already reduced next fiscal year's revenue projections by $16 million, and Don will talk about that here in a minute. I want to remind you of our financial policies that allow for time for good, strategic, non-emotional decisions to be made about this plan or our budget for the future once we have enough good data to help make those decisions. And Mayor, with that, I'll ask Don to get started.
Thank you, City Manager and Mayor and Council. So we are heading into the fiscal year 2020-21 year, beginning July 1st, and there are certain requirements set by the state and timelines that we have to follow. So this is really kind of our next step that we do in Chandler to have these conversations openly and prepare ourselves for the upcoming tentative adoption of the budget in May and final adoption by June. So tonight, each year when we head into a budget, we also set a theme for that year. And it's kind of interesting in the light of everything happening right now. There's an enormous weight on all of you, an enormous weight on city management as well as staff. And it's pretty amazing how much everyone has risen to the challenge throughout this difficult time. But our theme this year is the future's in sight. And we think about Chandler prior to COVID and kind of that cloud hanging over us right now, but the autonomous vehicles and the expansion of downtown and all the wonderful things that are happening in our community, they're still happening. And of course, we have a strong community that is coming together during this time. So the future is in sight, and I think we're ready for it. So our agenda that we'll be talking about today, and of course, you know, if we were in the council conference room, this would be a conversation, and I'm hoping it can be that way today as well. But we'll start with the public safety personnel retirement system discussion. We'll go to the update on our assessed valuations. In our first budget workshop, we did not have final property values. We now have them, and we can talk about that and the impact on the city. We'll focus, in the first budget workshop, we focused on really on our 5-year general fund operating budget, our ongoing operating budget, but we're gonna just look at what has changed since we presented that last time for the 2021 general fund operating budget. And then we'll talk about the remaining funds that are in the general fund balance. We look at that and we look at how we're gonna use those funds over the next 5 years. We're proposing some uses of those dollars. as well as our proposed 10-year capital improvement plan. Because eventually we're going to roll out of what we're going through right now, and we certainly want to be prepared for that. So next, our first part of the budget workshop is to talk about probably not our favorite discussion, but public safety pension funding. And we previously had Nick Ponder come to the city of Chandler in January 9th. It was January 9th. It seems so long ago. But he came and actually gave a great perspective, a historical perspective on what has changed in the public safety personnel retirement system, and reminded us that it has not been underfunded forever. It used to be fully funded and actually overfunded back in 2000. And of course, today in 2019, the overall pension is $9.3 billion underfunded as of 2019, and which means a 46.4% funded overall. The formula on this page is contributions plus investment interest income, which is a really important factor as we look at how each year has changed, equals the benefits and the expenses that get paid. So there's been a lot of changes that he walked through, and our next slide summarizes how we got here. And I'm certainly not going to go through all this, but Nick Ponder, at the time he presented, he did give a wonderful perspective of what all of these changes and state legislation that had really helped drain the public safety retirement pension fund over time, and really unsustainable investment practices that have now been corrected, and actuarial errors that you'll hear here in just a little bit continue to be corrected. I will point out that through the years, we actually used to be at an assumed interest rate of 8.5%. That just blew my mind that it used to be that high, because I always thought where we are today is high. But we're currently at 7.3, as that's been ratcheted down over the years. And the payroll growth is another big factor that is affecting our actuarial reports, was previously at 5.5%, as if every city was just adding massive positions every year. And now it's down to 3.5, and you'll see soon what ours really is in the city of Chandler. But there's been enormous actions taken all the way back to 2011 up to today that have really corrected some of these unsustainable practices. And we are certainly heading in the right direction, but there are definitely more actuarial corrections that need to take place to get us to a much better, clearer number as we move through the years. One other thing I wanted to mention on there is many of the bills that have been put into place have been very effective, but we won't see the benefits of a lot of that for years as members start to transition from tiers 1 and 2 to 3. So that's another important fact. Okay, so this is just so you can kind of see how we compare to our other Valley cities. This is our employer and employee rates for the fire department. And it shows, we started back in fiscal year 2014-15, because that's actually the year that all of these issues really came to light for us, when they found some pretty large actuarial issues with the report, and the PSPRS task force was pulled together. At that time, Chandler's rate was 21.5%. So since then, there's been a lot of legislation, a lot of changes that have taken place that have changed, added tiers to the plan, and now we're up to 43.8% in Chandler. But you will see across the entire valley, all of these cities, they're on that same trajectory, and many of them have started to make additional payments over and above, but we continue to try to do that in Chandler as well. In the current year, 2019-20, we were up to 40, and then of course with our most recent actuarial report, we went up again to 43.8. But I will point out the employee rate, as mentioned before, is still 7.65 and remains at that level, and that's due to the fact that there is plan changes that affect existing members or retirees are limited, since the Arizona Constitution states that benefits cannot be diminished or impaired. Therefore, the majority of the changes impact only new hires in the program now. So that's fire's rates, and then this slide shows where we're at on our police rates, our sworn police officers. We were in 14-15 at 24.7, and today we're up to 49.1%. So it's important that we do something about that, because that employer contribution rate just continues to grow. We had a lot of conversation about that last year that I'll talk about here in just a moment. But to translate this to dollars, the total police and fire employer contribution, so we're not talking percentages here, back in 14-15, the city of Chandler was paying $9.3 million for our employer contribution for police and fire. Today, it's up to $19.9 million. So it's significantly grown over that period of time. And this is the area that we really need to make a difference.
Mayor. So let me, we're clear here. The 19.9 million, that is just our minimum contribution to this.
Through the mayor,
And nothing
Councilmember
else,
Orlando.
that's what we put in there,
I
correct?
apologize. You're absolutely correct. That is, the rate is made up of a normal portion of the rate, which would be, if we didn't have an unfunded liability, it would be about 33% of that. And the rest of it is all the minimum payment going towards our unfunded liability. You are correct.
Okay. So anything above this, like we did last year, would be a positive contribution.
Yes, Councilmember Orlando, that's correct.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor.
Question, maybe I misunderstood the new tier 3 or something, but I thought the new tiers were making a larger contribution than the tier 1, tier 2.
Through the mayor, Councilmember, or Vice Mayor Lopez, that is correct. Tier 3 actually has a higher contribution rate, but it's also made up of a normal and an unfunded portion. They're expected to pay towards the unfunded liability as well. On behalf of the employer is expected to pay even for a tier 3.
Right.
But
so
you are correct, it is a higher.
So my question kind of revises that chart. Is it just small enough that it's not really showing an increase over the employee contribution because it looks flat for the last 3 years? Is that
Yes,
misunderstanding the chart?
Vice Mayor Lopez, that is, the chart itself is actually showing the tier 1 and 2 rates only. We do not
Okay.
have tier 3 on there because we have, I think we're up to, it's a very small number. It's less than 50 employees are currently in tier 3. So right now, we're really focused on the larger portion of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so the other thing we wanted to do is show a comparison with the other Valley cities on where the unfunded liability balances are. For City of Chandler, at the end of June 18's actuarial report, we were at 172 million, police and fire combined. And June 2019, we're at 180 million. So we did see an increase of 8 million, and we'll talk about why here in just a moment. But you will notice all of the cities did experience increases on average about 6.7% overall. And a lot of that was due to some actuarial changes, again, that were implemented by the board to try to make the numbers more accurate as we move to a more realistic investment rate, those type of things. So when Nick Ponder was here, he talked a lot about corrective actions that cities were taking through the years. And I wanted to mention, because I think when he was talking, I was on the edge of my seat. I wanted to say, you all did that. You did all of those recommended changes. So here's a summary of those that we are doing in the city of Chandler. And every recommended action that we could have taken in regards to minimizing our rates and our unfunded liability were taken through the years. You couldn't have done more, including doing the overpayments, unless we were just putting more money towards it. But we really took advantage of every recommendation that was sent our way. Those are listed there. Additionally, this was a chart that Mr. Ponder used in his presentation that summarizes our assets and liabilities for the police and fire program to support the future retirements of our sworn. And it does show how it's grown over time as our employee base has grown as well. But the lines, the black and the orange lines represent the funded status. And I used this slide in the first budget workshop, but I'm going to reiterate it again because even though we've made, this does not reflect the $25.7 million overpayment that we scheduled in the current year. This is just through the $12.5 million that we've done so far. But you will notice our first year of making that payment was 2016-17, and that's when we started to flatten and start to go up slightly. So even though it's very slow and our numbers continue to grow, our funded status has actually increased the last few years in the city of Chandler. And I've wanted to bring us back to our current year, fiscal year 2019-20 pay down plan. As of June 30th, 2018, our actuarial unfunded balance was $172.5 million, and we did plan to pay down our unfunded liability by, it would be the year right after 2027. But given the new information and the modeler that we'll talk about here in just a moment, that has dramatically changed for us.
Vice Mayor.
You can go back that one. So just so I can timing wise validate. So we did make, the past one was the 18, that was last year's. And so for this year, we made the 39 in the 1920. So last July, we made a $39 million payment, correct?
Yeah, so
Is that
our
right?
Vice
Okay.
Mayor Lopez, that 39 million represents the overpayment of 25.7, plus part of our employer contribution is funded with one-time dollars, so it includes that, plus assumed interest that we would earn because we prepay that employer contribution July 1st. So it's the sum of what we believe is going to be posted towards the unfunded liability, but not until the June 30th, 2019 report, or 2020 report, I apologize. It's not going to be until next year's June 20, this year's, we haven't got this year's, so June 30th, 2020 actuarial report will reflect the 1920, the large payment we made in the current year, 1920.
Which would consist of the payment, our payment, the employee contributions, plus the assumed interest for the entire year of growth for those funds, July through June. Right?
That is
Okay.
correct.
All right.
You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So based on that trend line, do you think we're going to continue to be making progress as it relates to PSPRS? And then second part of that question is what is that money invested? Is it in stocks and bonds, or is it in muni bonds? What is it? Is it just sitting as cash?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, great question. The monies that are invested at PSPRS, they have an investment manager that they have much more liberty than we're allowed at the city of Chandler. They invest out up to 20 years. They invest in stocks. They invest international. But it's very well diversified, because in the past, what they've done is they've put it into very volatile sectors and then they've lost a lot. So they have it spread out. There's a lot more scrutiny on the investments now than there ever was before. Although you'll hear me in just a moment talk about our interest rate that we actually earned this last year wasn't that great in comparison to our assumed. So part of why our unfunded grew, I think that's a huge part of conversation that goes on at the PSPRS board, is how they're investing the dollars and maximizing those earnings on those monies, but they certainly don't keep them liquid. They continue to try to meet that assumed rate in the actuarial report of 7.3. Well, so yeah, there's a surprise, and I don't know if it's the best surprise, but yeah, that is certainly going to change a little bit with the new information that we have today. Okay, I'll talk about that here in just a moment. Okay. So we received our June 30th, 2019 actuarial reports for police and fire, and that was in December 12th, and I believe it was the same day we had our budget kickoff, because it was like 2 hours before we met for the budget kickoff. And so I looked at that report and I just thought, oh dear, here we go. So our unfunded liability increased to $8 million overall, and you can see the breakout between police and fire, and of course, these are specific to our own people, our own demographics, city of Chandler. Although investments are pooled between all cities, all employers that are part of the PSPRS plan, this represents city of Chandler Police and Fire. Our employer contribution also increased $1.2 million to went up to 19.4 million overall between police and fire. And like I mentioned earlier, that's funded partially with one-time funding, acknowledging the fact that as we continue to make payments and bring that rate down, that our ongoing, we're recognizing the ongoing portion, but that part of that will eventually drop. But last year when I stood before you, barring no other changes to our actuarial assumptions, we were actually flatlined from the prior year to the current year. And it looked like we were going to start heading in the right direction. They got a new actuary. PSPRS actually fired their last actuary, got a new actuary, and they really started digging into the numbers and realized that, and really bringing to light to the board's attention some flaws in the assumptions that were being made by the prior actuary, and they were spot on in many of these cases. So there's been a lot of cities sending staff to the board meetings to hear the conversations, to really understand what is happening with everything and understand what changes are coming forward again. We need to know where that number truly is. And right now, it's getting closer, but there certainly are more adjustments that need to be made. So I'll go through some of those reasons right now. In our current actuarial report, oops, I apologize.
No, I'm sorry. I got a couple questions on this slide. Are you done with this?
I was going to go through the reasons, but if you
Okay, I
have,
just want to get a quick, with the model you received, is there a way of putting in different rates of return on investments?
through the Mayor Council Member Orlando, there is. We can not only change the assumed interest rate, but we can also play with the actual interest earnings.
So the actual number that came in for the year was 5.4?
The tier 1 and 2 actual earnings were 5.4% for.
So what are they using for this year for their actuals?
So it's the assumed interest rate is their projected interest rate, and that's locked in at 7.3%.
Okay, so let me just take a deep dive on the assumed interest rates, because that seems to be the variable here. We know how many employees we have, we know what we have to put into it, but the variable is that rate. How do we know that assumed rate is, what's the confidence level of that assumed rate?
Through the Mayor Councilmember Orlando, that is one of the biggest debates at the board level for PSPRS. There's some that believe 7.3 is absolutely reasonable. We should be able to achieve that every single year. And the way in the actuarial report, they actually smooth the last 7 years' earnings. So although this year we earned 5.4, the actual rate that got applied was 6.7% because it's smoothed over that 7-year period. But that is by far one of their biggest arguments between board members. Some of them want to take the assumed rate down lower because that really kind of sets the projection all the way out the 17 years for us. We have 17 years left to be amortized. Whereas, some believe that it's absolutely achievable. It has not been achievable as of when you smooth the last few years, although we did have a year that it exceeded that. And you'll see here actual earnings for tier 3 were 9%. So I was kind of thinking they should invest tier 1 and 2 similar to 9, tier 3, but they won't listen to me. No, they have very wise investment advisors, but I think there's a lot of conversation around that and how they diversify them, and they are invested slightly differently as they've set up a new fund for tier 3 as well. They invest those separate from tier 1 and 2.
So let me just probe this one more question here, because again, I'm a little concerned about that confidence level. They seem to be hitting it or missing it by X factor every year, whether it's plus, mostly minus.
Right.
Do we have a way of putting a lower factor into our return so that we could get a better feel for what we think we're going to be paying over the next 17 years?
Through the Mayor Councilmember Orlando, we do with the modeler, we can actually run a lot of different scenarios on that. And the modeler actually allows us to estimate it coming in. It won't let us go lower than 6.5.
Oh, then that's...
But anywhere above that, we can kind of set it each year and make our best guess based on how they're investing. But honestly, that 7.3, that they want to take it down again in our next year. That's one of the changes they want to make. And what was absolutely enlightening to Matt and I is when we actually put the 0.1% reduction to that rate into the modeler, it had over a $4 million impact to the unfunded liability. Just 0.1%. So the board's really trying to take a careful approach in bringing that down slowly. Some cities say, just rip the Band-Aid off, put it where you think it needs to be, and let's move forward so we know what our number is. Others are like, no, that would just
Well, that's.
grow the
well, that-
liability.
I'm sorry, Mayor, that's what I was driving at, is, you
Yeah.
know, is there a way to rip the Band-Aid off and say, just the number we should be looking at, guys? And then that'll give us a better feel for what we're gonna do over the next 5 to 10 or 15 years. But you're,
Yeah, through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, there's so many cities that are funded at different levels. If they did that all in one fell swoop, I think there's objections from some of the smaller cities that would just.
I
it would-
see, that makes sense.
It's a really,
Right.
they have to be very careful about how that's done.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dawn.
Okay, so we talked about the assumed rate, the actual earnings. They also changed the mortality tables, updated to public safety specific. And it actually had a negative impact because it looks like from the tables they were using previously, it shows that public safety is going to live longer, which is great news. It's good news, but it did actually make the unfunded liability grow for us. Also, greater than expected retirements and terminations, so moving people from contributing to actually pulling out of the plan, and partially offset by lower salary increases. And then our payroll growth assumption, like just a huge topic of conversation again, 3.5%. There are some cities that are still in a very significant growth phase that are actually meeting that. I mean, I believe Queen Creek said that they've actually met the 3.5%. But City of Chandler, we're a well-established city. We're not adding a lot of folks every year. Our payroll growth for police this year was 0.05%, and for fire was 1.33%. Very different from what they built into the actuarial report, contributing to why we have an $8 million increase in our unfunded and an increase in our employer contribution.
Mayor. To be clear on the 0.05 and 0.3 increase, is that based on salaries and merits and those kind of things, or is that based on the number of bodies that you have and the overall like retirements like you mentioned, or is that just a lump that we paid for?
Yep, through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, that's a good question. It is actually based on, a lot of it's based more on the bodies and the actual people that you're adding to the plan and the growth, that the actual growth going up. The merit and COLA is actually a smaller portion of that. When you look at how people retire, come off, and then people are hired at the lower range, it's meant to be kind of an offset in that respect. But so it's more so the growth as in adding people and continuing to grow as an organization. For fire, we didn't add sworn, so that does represent on the fire side the COLA and merits. But as people then start retiring, that will look very different. It will be flatter even. Okay. Okay. So more changes are anticipated. As we head into we plan for the June 30th, 2020 report, which will affect our fiscal year 2020-21. The board has the new actuary. They're looking very close. They're discussing methodologies. They provided the modeler, which has been absolutely enlightening in quantifying how these changes are impacting our numbers. They have already given cities and employers a heads up that they are talking about reducing the salary growth assumptions, potentially either changing them to actual growth, like ours being the 0.05 and the 1.33, or coming up with a lower kind of blanketed, like 1.5%, say, across all employers. They haven't made that decision. We took a more conservative approach when we costed our projections and we put our actual numbers in. They also talked about further decreasing the assumed rate of return down to 7.2, and we built that in, as well as a slight reduction in the actual based on what's been happening recently. And also they talked about how they're amortizing their gains and losses. And right now we have 17 years left in our amortization period, and we are on what's called a closed amortization plan. And so every time there's a gain or loss, it's amortized over that period. what they're talking about now is layering that, so it's almost like doing, amortizing, like having 17 different schedules of that over the years, and it will actually help our number, but we left, again, to remain conservative, we left it closed like we currently are, because that would be, I guess, the worst case scenario. It would benefit us should they go to a layered approach. So, whoop, I'm not done with that one. Go back. Thank you, Matt. So the results are slow but needed. We talked about the pay down plan that was formulated back in 2015. At this point, we put in $12.5 million of overpayments over and above our employer contribution. And really, it's the 1920 year that had the big 25.7. So that will be taken into account as we look at all of these other changes that are anticipated. But it is important that we know what that number is. So we want them to correct actuarial flaws. We want to know what our number is in the end. So we ran all those options, and we kind of took it, like I said, very conservatively. And this is where we ended. And I'm pretty sure the city manager may have mentioned to you that first bullet, our current plan to achieve 100% funded by June 30th, 2017, 9 years ahead of the actuarial 17-year date of 2036, is no longer attainable if the board makes all of those changes. And again, we built all of them in. And the chance that they'll do them all to that degree, I don't know. But we kind of took that worst case scenario. So then we ran it through the modeler to see what that would look like if we continued to make our planned overpayments and committed those dollars, plus we actually increased it by $8 million, option one. And what it does is it brings us to 50% funded by June 2027, and the other 50% would fall into the latter years. But we'll show you what that means here in just a minute. We actually have the numbers and comparing how that changes. And just to try to figure out, if we were to take it to 70% funded by year 9, like we had previously planned 100%, but at 70%, it would require us to add another $38.5 million on top of the 75.7 in order to achieve a 70% funded. And we just didn't feel that that was even realistic. We really want to take a balanced approach here, given the fact that it's a moving target for us. But we really want to understand what the benefit is of continuing to prepay. And that was the big puzzle we were trying to work through as we, I don't want to say played with the modeler because it wasn't fun, but as we kind of ran scenarios in the modeler and looked at all the different scenarios that we could. So, oops. We wanted to show you too, when we talked about the 5-year one-time funding that would be used over we always look out 5 years. This is what we had planned in navy blue when we were, the use of our one-time dollars. So it included the overpayment plus the portion of our employer contribution we were using one-time dollars for. But we wanted to show you with what's being proposed in the red bars, what that would look like. And what we ended up doing is moving some of that up into the first 2 years and adding $8 million to that to bring it up to the overpayment portion of that includes a $67.7 million. That's the overpayment, excluding the portion we're using towards the employer contribution. That's what this is reflecting here. Did you have questions on that last slide before I move on? Okay. All right. So really then the whole, what we were trying to figure out is what then is the benefit of continuing to make payments towards this? What is the benefit? What does that look like in our actuarial modeling when we're considering investing additional payments of $67.7 million? So we ran that for police and fire. We have a separate modeler for each that shows the projection, starting with the base of the June 30th, 2019 actuary report. And this little chart on the right shows all the years, starting with year one, that's our current year 2020, 1920 fiscal year, all the way down to year 17, 2036. If you were to look at our current projection and not make any additional payments, just remove all those additional payments, and then compare it to the modeler with the assumptions. Okay, hold on a second. I want to make sure I have this right in my mind, that I'm explaining it correctly. So already building in all of those assumptions. So the reduction of the board of the 0.10% from 7.3 to 7.2, the reduction in the payroll growth down to our actual, and the closed amortization schedule, and just simply remove contributions, so no additional payments, compared to making additional payments, and then subtracting the two. This is the result. The annual employer contribution, by year 3, we would be paying $2,941,000 more if we did not make additional payments. By year 4, we'd pay 4.7 more if we didn't make additional payments. And then that grows over time because that employer contribution is going to continue to grow. By year 17, it adds up to $103.4 million. And then the unfunded liability, if we were to not make additional payments and follow that through, and the board makes all those adjustments, like we talked about, we would still, if we didn't make additional payments, still have an unfunded liability of $20 million at the end. So bringing those together, the total savings is $133.4 million for an investment of $67.7 million in the end. And that's really bottom line. By making those overpayments, we're keeping our employer contribution lower over time. It allows us to do more with those dollars over time. Any questions on that?
So let's go back. You said additional payments. What are you looking at the minimum assumption for additional payments for year 2022?
The previous slide?
Yeah, the one that's up now. No, the one at the blue one. Yeah. I mean, this white one here. So you said annual employer contribution. What is your assumed additional payment you're making in that year?
In total, so go back to the prior slide, and it's the red line there. So that would reflect the 21-22, that would be the 19.2. So by then we would have made an additional payment of 20.5, and we would have made another additional payment of the 19.2.
Okay, so we're going to put additional payment of 19.2. Let me make sure I got my question here. An additional payment of 19.2 on top of the normal payment. Am I right now?
So I'm going to correct myself because I just realized this one-time funding includes the additional payments plus the portion of our
That's what
employer
I'm-
contribution
okay, that's what I'm driving-
that's
okay.
going towards the unfunded.
All right, so what's the
So
additional payment? Go
the
ahead.
additional payment in 2021 is $15 million. That's the portion of that that is going towards the unfunded, and that's split between police and fire.
So I guess my question to you, Dawn, is we're making additional payment of 15X, whatever that number is, to save $3 million the next year.
Right, so that's a very good point, Councilmember Orlando. So we have additional payments going only up to 2026. So we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2026 is the last year that we're scheduling additional payments. From that point forward, the rest, you're actually achieving savings because you made those additional payments up front. You're achieving those annual savings in our employer contribution every year.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I know the long run, but I'm still looking at my mind, putting 15 million up to get $3 million savings. Is there a better use of that money? One-time dollars for capital improvement, which creates jobs, creates a lot of other things versus just putting all that money in there. I mean, do we weigh that on what the balance of that money would be if we did not invest it and did something else with that money that'll create maybe sales tax in the future, or, you know, construction taxes, sales taxes, jobs, you know, that type of stuff where we would say, gee, this is maybe a better investment.
Yep, through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, that is certainly the balance here. I mean, just looking at in just showing the data on what making those overpayments does, it's really looking into the future on how much we'd be saving on an annual basis. And on average, it's about that $8 million number. But if you're just going to look at 1 year,
Well, let's look
I
at the
mean,
next year.
that's where you would see that comparison is.
I understand your
2.9
compounding
million.
dollars. I get that.
Mhm.
I mean, I think we all understand that. But my point is still, what are you going to do in 2023? How much additional dollars do in 2023?
The
Going
portion
back.
of that is the 19, I bring that sheet. I believe, let me think for a minute. It's about 14 million, or I think it's about 14 million, the
Okay, so-
additional payment.
And then that's roughly,
Portion.
we're just roughly, I mean, so you're $30 million to save 8 million. To knock off $8 million. Again, what's the cost of doing something else with that dollars?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't have an answer, but I'm just asking you. And then I guess my second question is, I know the actual tables are coming out in sometime this year that we put the money, the additional dollars in last year. Did you model that for a go-forward period? Can you do that?
Yes, they're included in here. That's part of this. We've already included the 25.7 million additional payment in the model because the modeler actually starts with the June 30th, 2019 report. So we're going to recognize that and see what it does, plus add those additional payments to get to this result.
Okay.
Not like we've got vast green fields. To me, it's going to come down to if we don't spend this here, there's other things we could certainly do. Some economic development, maybe streets, maybe parks. But for your analogy, I don't know if that's a fair analogy to say, what else can we invest this 19 or whatever $1 million in and see what's the return, as opposed to us deciding to say we don't want to spend this much here and looking elsewhere. So as I'm just talking through this, that's not necessarily an apples to apples decision.
Let's further, so how much is in our CIP right now for the next 5 years, roughly?
The next 5 years, I can tell you.
But even the
We haven't
CIP is not necessarily economic development. It's things that we have put on there that we would like to see done, different expenses, parks, roads, et cetera. But
that's my point.
It's not an economic development issue necessarily.
But again, you're creating jobs by building out infrastructure. You're creating jobs. You're actually getting sales tax off construction dollars. You are creating some wealth. I mean,
One-time dollars is
well,
what you're
again, but
comparing.
this is one-time dollars here too.
Yeah, but this leads to a longer growth as opposed to one-time dollars.
Again, Mayor, I'm not arguing, I'm just asking the question,
Yeah.
to be honest with ourselves. I mean, putting up 30 million to get 8 million, when if I took some of that money and moved up some capital projects, what can we do to further enhance our community in the long term, as well as, and you're right, there'll be some one-time dollars. What did we do? I mean, that's what you do with your mortgage payment. You do the
Sure.
same thing. I'm gonna put an extra $1,000 on my mortgage. It knocks $250 off, but if I took that $1,000 and did something else with it, is it worth me doing that?
Yeah.
That's all I'm suggesting.
And I think, I agree with you on that. It's enhancing community necessarily worth recouping investment on dollars on that. I mean, to me, that's the choice before us of largely what to do with these. So, Councilmember Rowe.
Well, Mayor, thank you. While this is painful for us to review and go over, I think that we have just been so fortunate for such a long period of time that if we make this investment, we're making it because we can make it. And there may be a time in a year or 2 years or somewhere in that in the future there where it's going to be everything we can to put the money together to meet our obligations. So I think some of these discussions have occurred in the past, not necessarily about this, but about other things, other councils have sat in council chambers and said, look, we know the price corridor is coming someday, and do we just keep spending money on that and with the hope that it's going to, come into something that's just really amazing? I know that's not exact comparison, but I am saying people before us were saying, look, this is what we need to do, and we need to do it. And while it might not be fun, it'll be a whole lot less fun in some of these future years, maybe even next year.
Yeah, agree, Mayor. I'm sorry. It's me. So again, I was an advocate for putting extra dollars down last year, you know that. I'm still an advocate for putting additional dollars. But again, I'm looking at such a large investment of one-time dollars, and there are needs there for us as a community. Is there a better balance we'd come up with to be able to leverage the dollars today a little bit more? And maybe you go, instead of 8 years, you go 12 years, you go 13 years. Again, I'm just asking the question, with things getting tighter right now, I mean, things are gonna get a little tighter for the next year at least. Does it make more sense for us to look at something, bringing up some projects that we could get immediate bang for the buck today versus, $2-3 million here, $20 million there, $30 million at the end? That's all I'm suggesting. And if we could look at that, again, that was my thought process on that.
Mayor. Yeah. Mayor, Councilmember Orlando, that's a really good question. If the council wants to pursue that, if you can give us some idea of what projects you might be speaking about, we can certainly run that analysis, because you're exactly right. It will provide some upfront one-time construction tax and that sort of thing. But we also have to be cognizant of whatever type of project you might be willing to spend money on. There could be ongoing costs that we've not yet captured, and those ongoing costs are going to be added to the budget once those projects are complete. So if we could get some idea, we'd be happy to take a look at that and provide council more information.
Okay, all right. Excuse me. Mayor and Council, thank you so much for your comments. I know this is an enormous decision. It is a lot of money. And you'll notice the comment at the bottom of this slide about recommending committing to the plan. And again, thinking of a balanced approach, because that was one of the things the city manager and staff were looking at as we were looking at one-time funding and all of the capital needs that were out there. Hopefully you'll see as we go through the capital plan where we're at and how we were able to fund certain things. But looking at the 50-50 approach in regards to kind of splitting the 17 years up and trying to fund 50% and 50% and still achieve savings, we were kind of trying to keep that in mind, but certainly we can run different scenarios as well. Delaying, we are recommending, if, again, recommending this plan because we feel it is a very financially prudent plan that leads to additional savings through the years, but delaying the overpayment, the prepayment of that overpayment, that $15 million in 2021, until we assess the impacts of COVID-19 on our budget. Really figure out what that impact finally is in the end, and certainly coming back to council later in the year. That was one of the thought processes with the city manager. Okay. Whoops.
Not to pin you in a date, but I mean, when are we looking at by June 30th, we're gonna have to make that decision? I mean, with the PSPRS board, if you write them a check on June 31st, does that make a difference whether it was July 1st? I mean, so is there a deadline we have to, again, make this assessment so that we kind of know when that's coming?
Yeah, through the mayor, Vice Mayor Lopez, the only requirement we have is that through our bi-weekly payrolls, we pay our employer contribution. We have chosen as a city to prepay that July 1st, or within that first payroll period. And that, of course, the 19.4 million, we would still do that. And they would start investing those dollars. The overpayment, the 15 million overpayment that's being recommended is the portion that it's totally up to mayor and council on that. We don't have to make the payment. We can delay the payment. It just delays when they get it into their investment which they can invest at a much higher rate on our behalf. That's really the crux of it. But we certainly don't want to send it and then find that this COVID impact goes further than the first quarter, potentially into 2021. We want to be able to adjust accordingly. And this would be one of those areas that we could adjust.
So just to clarify, so it does sound like we can make a payment any time throughout the year, but it just then gets prorated by the PSPS board for that, any percentage, again, like they said, the prorated percentage, but it would get prorated for 3/4 of a year if we made it in, August 1st or October 1st.
Through the Mayor, Vice Mayor Lopez, it would simply get added to their investments at that point in time. So we'd lose the ability to earn investments from July 1st to whenever we actually send the
Okay,
payment.
so it would be prorated
Yeah.
for whenever it was made.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. So moving on, kind of in summary here, the approach we've been taking is understanding that excess, of course, it's a combined responsibility. We're depending on state legislature to continue to look at ways of minimizing the impact on cities. PSPRS and the board is taking this very seriously and continuing to make changes. And of course, we want to continue to look at ours, because bottom line is our goal is to secure the employees' retirements. And each year we get those reports, we make sure we understand the demographics, we communicate them out annually, we update our plan, and we have a fact sheet that we'll continue to update annually, so it's a consistent communication with all members, unions, everything. And of course, staying involved, informed, and flexible, because it is an ever-changing environment for us. Any questions before we move to the wonderful topic of assessed valuation and property taxes?
I'd like to make an input real quick. Can I speak? Can you hear me?
We could hear you.
Okay, good, excellent. Yeah, I do like the plan to continue to throw money at this to secure the retirement for our first responders, and at least until I feel like we get a handle on it. And then at that point, maybe we can have alternative discussion. But even after what we put at it last year with the change in the actuary, we still grew. And at least I'd like to see the number go the other way. I'd be supportive of what is proposed here.
Councilmember McClymans, we hear you speaking, but your voice is really kind of muffled and rather than clear and articulate, so I'm not sure we captured that. Can you try again with that? And if you're doing anything that you can do better, speak closer, et cetera, that might help us.
Yeah, I'll try one more time. Is that better?
That is better.
Excellent. My apologies. I would be supportive of us continuing to be aggressive to get a handle on our PSPRS with additional pay down, at least until the point when we start seeing it turn, and then maybe we could discuss alternative manners. But even with what we paid down last year, it still went up. I know that was due to the change in actuary and the assumptions we made, but I'd be supportive of the plan that we have in place here for now.
Thank you. We fully understand your position now.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's proceed.
Turn it over to Matt Dunbar to talk about the assessed valuation and property tax update.
Right, Mayor and Council. So we received the update to our valuation for property tax assessments from the county, and we'd like to go over that with you tonight. So on this slide, if you look kind of along the top, is the 2019-2020, our current fiscal year, limited property values and the levy and the percentage increase. So in the current fiscal year, we had about $3 billion in limited property value throughout the city of Chandler. That demonstrated an 8.17% increase over the prior year. And our current tax rate, our primary tax rate is 0.2581, and our secondary rate is 0.87 for a total of 1.1281 per 100 of assessed value. The total levy for the current year is $33,968,800. So that gives you kind of a good picture of where we currently are with our property tax levy. With the updates we received from the county, the 2020-21 primary and secondary limited property value has increased. It's now $3.2 billion, and it shows a 7.71% increase. Now that $3.2 billion includes a variety of properties listed below. The net centrally valued properties, about $30 million. Really, the majority is the net real property. That includes our residential properties, apartment complexes, commercial properties. All of those properties are kind of lumped into that net real property, which is close to $3 billion, and that showed the majority of the increase in that section. And then also net personal property, primarily our businesses that have real property that they pay an assessment on. That's about $228 million and showed an increase as well, about 4.9%. When you break down that 7.71% increase over the prior year, 3.2% of that is just due to appreciation. So the property values have increased about 3.2% throughout the city. And then the rest, the 4.5%, is all new property that was added to the city rolls for property tax. So that gets you to your 7.71% increase that we've seen over the prior year. Now with that, we did decrease, as city manager mentioned, the primary property tax rate from 0.2581 to 0.2501. And that really allows us to remain below the truth in taxation threshold. It keeps our primary assessment the same for the current year when taking out the new property that was added. So if you left out that new property that was added, the assessed value or the levy total would be exactly the same last year compared to this year. So that difference between the 7.7 million and the 8.1 million you see year over year, that's the new property that was added to the levy. So with that reduction, that brings in the levy at 8.1 on the primary side, and then the secondary side is the 28.2 million for a total of levy of $36.3 million, or a $2.3 million increase. Now, the primary tax goes to our general fund and funds general operations of the city, and the secondary tax is used for our debt service obligations on GO bonds. So that portion is specific to funding our capital projects and things that we've bonded for. So here's the impact of what these changes do to our median home owner, median value homeowner. So the median values for 2021 are $272,700, so it increased 6.94%. Now, since we are in the state of Arizona, we do use the limited property value. We're capped at a 5% growth, so we show that as the next limited value is at $203,538, which shows a 5% increase over the prior year's limited property value. Our assessed limited value, which is 10% of the LPV, is at $20,354. And then on that, per $100 of assessed value, we establish our primary and secondary rates against those. The primary rate would be $50.90 for the year, and our secondary rate would be $177.08 for the year. So the total average homeowner in the city of Chandler would pay $227.98 for city of Chandler property tax, which indicates a 5% increase over the prior year. Now, what does that mean on an annual basis? The annual increase is about $10.86 per annum, or 90 cents per month. Because we did reduce that primary rate from 0.2581 to 0.2501, we do show the difference there, that reduction. The increase would have been $12.48, or a monthly increase of $1.04 if we didn't make that adjustment. So by reducing that primary rate down to the truth in taxation rate, we were able to reduce that annual spend by about $2 or $1.50 for the average home in Chandler. And this graph here, it shows the difference between the primary and secondary tax rates as well as the actual assessed value of the property. So you'll see that as property values go down, the rate needs to go up to compensate, to generate the same level of cash flow that's coming in to offset or to pay down our debt service fees. And then as property values go up, that rate can come down. because to generate the same level of income, we can bring those rates down. So that just shows kind of the ins and outs of how that process works of maintaining the same valuation coming into the city to pay for our ongoing needs, as well as the debt service obligations as properties continue to grow in value or decline in value, which we've seen back in 08, 9, and 9, 10. Any questions on that?
Mayor. So, we talked about this last year as well. Obviously, assessed value is going up, which is good. Obviously, legislators put an artificial cap, or we put ourselves an artificial cap of 5%. When that's been done years ago, I get that. But the real world today is we're looking at potentially adding 4 police positions. Would this $293,000 cover that, or most of it?
Yeah, so through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, it wouldn't cover the majority of those 4 positions. It would cover a percentage of them, obviously, but that reduction would, it was total of $259,475 by bringing that tax rate down to the truth in taxation levels. But it would cover a portion, but not all.
What percentage of that?
Let me give you an idea, Mayor, if I may. So just the one position for the commander that's already existing, that's been paid out of reserves, would take almost the entire $259,000 to cover that.
That's overhead and benefits, things like that, obviously, right?
That includes benefits, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we would, instead of occurring that as reserves, what we've been doing every year, we could at least cover that position with a known tax source, right? Known revenue source?
Correct, yeah, through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, we could designate, we wouldn't designate it specifically to that, but it would be a general fund obligation that could pay for that specific position.
All right. So what's the process of going through, if you have to do, what's the constitutional process?
Yeah, so through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, the process requires us to take several steps, including posting additional information to the public. We have to post 2 publications in a newspaper that is either generally circulated throughout the city of Chandler, or we can direct mail information to the taxpayers. And so we would have to have that, and then we have a truth in taxation hearing, and that truth in taxation hearing would be an open forum where the community could have an opportunity to comment on whether or not they wanted to increase that tax rate or not.
So that's the difference between not doing it and just our normal policy of publishing the budget and all that activity?
Yeah, it's on top of the normal processes that we currently have for our budget activity. It's a specific notice with specific requirements of, even the border has to be, this big a font and all those things, very specific requirements that we have to follow for those truth and taxation hearings.
And you're talking about just 90 cents a month for the average payer?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah, the differential is actually 14-cent difference per month between what they would have paid versus the reduction to the truth and taxation rate.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, thank you. Matt and Matt, you're not suggesting that we're not going to be able to hire a police commander if we don't give our citizens a tax break.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, no, that's not what we're intimating at all.
No, I was just comparing what it would take.
Gosh, I would hate to see that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Continue.
All right, so next we're going to talk about the general fund operating budget. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about primarily is just kind of the sound budgeting practices that the city of Chandler has adopted over the years that we try to follow. Number one, one of our goals is to maintain AAA bond ratings with all of the rating agencies. So we have 3 rating agencies that we currently utilize, and the city of Chandler is fortunate enough to be rated as AAA bonds with all 3 rating agencies, and that's a goal we want to continue to do. That allows us really to meet the needs on a capital side at the lowest possible cost, freeing up additional dollars for additional projects because we're not paying additional interest because our risk is heavy or high. Continued adherence to all fiscal policies. Really, those fiscal policies are what allow us to have that AAA bond rating. the rating agencies scrutinize our fiscal policies and are we adhering to them and what do they really do? Number one is probably our structural balance in the city of Chandler, where we have ongoing revenues supporting our ongoing expenditures and one-time revenues supporting one-time expenditures. That's really a key distinction when you're looking at financially sustainable organizations is being able to break out those two individual revenue streams and associating them with the expenditures. We also, in the city of Chandler, maintain strong reserves. We have a 15% general fund contingency reserve, and that's 15% of our total revenues, and a budget stabilization reserve that's a minimum of $10 million. So with those reserves, it really allows us to kind of weather any issues that come up through the economy, such as we're seeing now, that would allow us, should things turn further south than we think they're going to, we have some stabilization built into our budget to rely on. And that also offers the rating agencies additional kind of comfort level with the city of Chandler as a debtor. And then we manage expenditure growth and maintain our existing services. And managing expenditure growth is really key in the city of Chandler. All of the expenditures are really scrutinized, and we go through a process each year to look at any decision package adds or needs throughout the city and scrutinize those heavily. These next slides will break out what some of those decision package recommendations are for the current or for the next fiscal year, fiscal 2020-21. And this first slide shows our ongoing portion, and this represents all funds. In total, there's about $4.2 million in requests that were recommended, which is a slight reduction from the current year 1920 budget. And of that, almost nearly $1 million of the new ongoing is covered with budget reallocations or revenue offsets. So we've been able to find, through our discussions with department heads and their staff, ongoing resources that we could reallocate to some of the current needs, almost $1 million this current year, which is fantastic. In the ongoing decision packages, it does include 8 FTE, 8 new positions, 4 of which are included in police, and there's an asterisk there. One of those positions is currently being funded by one-time dollars and has been for a number of years as a one-time funded, but really it's an ongoing position, and we were lucky enough to be able to get it in this budget year into the ongoing portion of the budget, which is fantastic. We did break down each of the categories there of kind of what some of that spending includes. Everything from technology and security infrastructure, infrastructure maintenance, which is that kind of purplish color there, service expansion. You'll notice one of the larger ones is kind of that tan color, the solid waste contract increases. That represents the increases that we have for solid waste removal as well as our recycling program, which those costs are going up, and you've heard a lot about over the last few weeks. So those are the ongoing decision package adds, some of which include minimum wage and compression issues. A smaller percentage, about $133,000 is related to that, which we're seeing as this will be the last kind of major year that we're impacted by minimum wage increases. It'll go to more of a percentage after that, but we've had specific targeted known increases over the last couple of years that we've been able to budget for.
Mayor, if I may, one clarification, the almost $1 million, I just realized it's budget reallocations or revenue offsets, so it's about 780,000 of that was the revenue or budget reallocations. A portion of that is also one of those police positions is an SRO position, and that is covered by a grant, so that's also included in there. Just to clarify.
And the SRO is half grant, half school, correct? Or is it half grant, half us?
This position that is built into the budget is 100% funded by the grant.
Okay. And with all these things, again, we've got flexibility to make changes. Again, this is a recommended budget that we will still allocate spending. And if we're on a freezing, if we've frozen hiring, then even though these are in there, they're not hired, similar to the additional, what'd you say, 80 people that we currently can hire. So we're not giving, we still have the opportunity for input all along next year as we walk through the impacts of COVID-19 and the obvious or potential loss of TPT with our community, et cetera.
Mayor, you're exactly right, and you'll notice the caveat there at the top of this particular screen. where no positions or new positions will also be held, and any contracts or everything will continue to be scrutinized, just as you said, depending on what we see with the COVID virus economically.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, let's keep going.
All right, this next slide talks about our one-time decision package requests for the current, or for the next fiscal year. About $8.5 million in requests, which is, again, a slight reduction from 1920. And 1.1 million of those are covered with revenue offsets. So again, we see that there are some revenue streams coming in that will help cover some of these related costs. Included in that, you'll see one of the larger ones is the personnel in the green color, 1.8 million. We do have about $775,000 of that is dedicated for fire academy and paramedic training to help offset as we have public safety personnel that are entering the drop and looking at retirement soon to help make sure that we have enough staffing that's trained and ready to fill those positions as they come on board. So in that personnel and contracted staff related, you'll see that. We also have some additional infrastructure maintenance, which is covered by one-time dollars, the 2.1 million, which is the majority, that purple color. And then a variety of others, including some special programs and special events that are covered, including a potential second weekend of the Ostrich Festival, which is covered with some revenue offsets. Okay. All right, and just to the COVID-19 impacts that were included in the general fund forecast. So these are the ones that we've gone through and made adjustments already. We've incorporated a one-time reduction of revenues in the current fiscal year, 1920, of about $6 million, and that'll show up when we're going through the forecast in the general fund budget. So the budget at the top will be a reduction of about $6 million that we anticipate in the current or the last quarter of this fiscal year. But we've also looked at some of the impacts in the first quarter of 2020-21 and reduced that by about 10 million. Now, granted, these are preliminary, estimates of what the impact could be. There's a lot of unknowns around this, how long things will be closed down and how much of an impact there's going to be in the general economy. This is just taking a look at those tax or TBT items that are the most likely to see decreases initially over that 6-month period and making some reductions in those, as well as some contemplating what that net effect is going to be kind of in that longer term, that 6 months, over the next 6 months as we reevaluate. But we will be looking and monitoring these revenue streams closely over the next few weeks and months, including some of the weekly reporting that we'll be doing, as well as we currently have monthly revenue and expenditure reports that we do, and we'll be adding some additional information to those as well. So we can truly really monitor and get a handle as quickly as possible what the net impact is going to be to the city of Chandler. We'll also, oh, go ahead.
Matt, thank you. What's our normal intake of revenue, just tax revenue from?
It's just over
TPT.
120 million in tax revenue, TPT revenue from the city's TPT revenues. That doesn't include the state shared revenues, but just our own TPT revenue is about 120 million over that.
Understood. So you couple that with, so that's about an 8% decrease in revenues is expected for 2021. You couple that with the impact of the property tax, where we're going to have some valuation decrease, as well as some stores that may be empty or some abatement on property tax, or not property tax, but rents and things like that. Do you think that's a fair estimate moving into June through July, considering, the elephant in the room? I know we're all trying to be careful with that conversation, but do you think that's a reasonable estimate?
Through the mayor, council member, I think from the information that we have now, it's a reasonable estimate. Clearly, we'll be getting additional information, and we have, day by day, and as things change, and these numbers could change again as we continue to look at things. But as of the information that we have now, I think they're reasonable estimates that we can definitely and will take a look at continuously to try to make any adjustments as needed, so that we, clearly we want to share with the city manager the most accurate information that we can, so she can make sound decisions and bring information to the council to make those policy decisions on where we go from here.
So follow-up question to that, if I may, Mayor. So continuing through this process with, listen, this is a moving target, I get it. But continuing through this process, it's going to be a challenge to get that data. We can't, it's just going to be a challenge. I'd rather us see a little bit more conservative estimates on what that decrease is going to be moving forward, just from what I'm hearing from small business owners and large business owners in the community. I think the ripple effect from this is going to be significant, maybe in the 12 to 15% range. And I'd love to see something that models that moving forward. We're going to be out of business. Our restaurants are going to be out of business for the entire month, or, for the next week minimum. So I think it's something we need to really consider. So we're not just, I don't want you guys to do extra work. So if we're going to just move forward with that, that's just a hope.
Yeah. So one thing to add there through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, we are anticipating also spending reductions that will minimize, hopefully, and that's we've taken that into account when we're looking at the revenues as well, is potentially bringing down our spending and holding off on some of these to generate more one-time dollars to help minimize those impacts. That's part of the strategy as well as we work with the city manager. So
I knew you would. Great. Thanks for already getting after that.
And Mayor, Councilmember, just clarify, we still have the 10% management reserve, or the $10 million management reserve?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, correct.
Okay,
Yep,
thanks.
that's built into the budget as well.
I'm calling misnomers, not management reserve. What is it called?
It's a budget stabilization reserve.
Budget stabilization reserve. In industry, it's management reserve, budget stable. Got it. Okay, thanks.
All right, and just that last bullet, should impacts continue, the forecast already includes a downturn. City manager spoke about that earlier, that, we did build that in our current budget and fiscal year 22-23, and that would remain, but we would have to take some measured reductions that would need to be implemented. We're definitely watching that. We'll be forecasting the revenues continuously and looking at all of the impacts that we can, as soon as we gather information, we'll be going through that, so.
apologize. We're down to the last two agenda discussion points. This one is our proposed 5-year one-time general fund balance forecast. So these are the dollars that at the end of any given year, revenues come in, expenditures go out. If there is dollars remaining, they accumulate in the general fund balance. They're considered our idle funds that get invested and are used for one-time capital projects, one-time contracts, those type of things. So we've actually, last year we did this, and we're doing it again this year, where we're laying out our 5-year forecast. And like Matt mentioned, we have already incorporated the impacts, our initial impacts of the COVID-19 economic forecast. And our beginning fund balance on line 1, that $172,830,000, estimates our current year, all revenues coming in, expenditures going out, and we've reduced those revenues by that $6 million figure. Again, we will watch that. We will continue to monitor that, but that is the balance we're starting with to really lay out our 5 years and our spending plan for our general fund balance. The next section, line 2 through 7, shows all of the one-time revenues that we would anticipate flowing into to add to the fund balance. So when we do our 5-year general fund forecast, that represents the current revenues that are coming in on an annual basis, our sales tax revenue, permit fees, facility rentals, all those type of things. All of that, of course, we already know, we talk about it each year, that not all of that is ongoing in nature. A portion of that is going to be one time. It's that, I think when we showed you, when we showed you the preliminary forecast in the first budget work session, it was 85% of our revenues that are flowing in we considered as ongoing revenues to support our ongoing costs, and 15%, which equated to 39.9 million or almost 40 million, was the number on line 3. So you can see this has been reduced by the $10 million figure. which in the proposed forecast now puts it at 88% ongoing and 12% one-time. So that's been taken into account, but you will also notice in year 21-22 that 10 million was added back in, assuming that we're going to rebound. It's going to go back up. And of course, then you'll start to see it go dip down again because of the fact that we have built in the downturn then starting in 22-23. But that is something we'll have to watch. These are our assumptions at this point in time. Line 4, we have certainly through the years, we've actually built growth-related projects and used general fund dollars. So we still have some of those impact funds that are paying back the general fund. So these are the interfund transfers that are coming into the general fund. It's another one-time source coming into the fund balance that can be used for all of these purposes we discussed. And then line 5, this is one of those items that that I think there was a subcommittee regarding the LED conversion, energy savings of converting our traffic lights to LED. What that's going to do is generate ongoing savings over the years. It's a great plan, but part of the plan is to take some of that ongoing savings and reinvest it as one time back into the capital investment. So we've shown that coming in to the revenues, leaving a total in year 2021 of $204,351,000 to start to draw down from. So down below that, now we start to talk about our expenditures. These are the type of things that we're using the one-time dollars on. The first section is our economic development, strategic economic development reserve. And many of these are the contracts that you're aware of, that you've talked about over the last few years. Line 11 through 15 reflect those contracts and those commitments. And these are really the best, based on if they were to get maximum use of their commitments, they bring in all of the personnel that they've committed to. This would be the payout in those contracts. And then we also include just in other line 16, it's really a $500,000 contingency that if anything comes up mid-year that we want to try to take advantage of, there's something to pull from in regards to the strategic economic development area. But that would require council approval to use those dollars. We also have a downtown redevelopment reserve. It's just a cushion, really, anything going on in downtown that could be used towards maintenance or anything like that that might be needed in our downtown area.
So, Mayor, thank you. We're not reducing that. We're just showing the fact that's already obligated to the 204 million. I'm missing that chart.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, are you asking about the
Right.
downtown
I'm
redevelopment reserve?
I'm looking at parentheses. Parentheses always scare me. It means negative, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it is, the projection does assume we're going to spend it, but typically both the line 16 and the line 19 numbers, I think it was probably been about 3 years since we've even touched those dollars. They end up falling back into general fund and they get rebudgeted in the following year. But the projection does show that it's drawing down that balance.
Okay, that's what okay, got it.
Okay. All right, so continuing on, you will see in lines 21 through line 29, all of the capital dollars that we have currently built into our new 10-year plan. This is showing 5 years here, 5 years of those commitments, but using our general fund balance and the areas, the detail, of course, that we're using, the projects that these are dedicated to will be our conversation we'll have in the next section of our agenda. But these are the totals for community services, cultural development, and again, if they were to spend every dollar of the capital project that's listed here, which typically doesn't happen, that those dollars typically, maybe they get 50% through the project, it carries forward to the next year, and that's why we have that line 29 capital carry forward, because typically those projects will span 2 to 3 years. But when we're doing our projection, we assume they're going to spend 100% of those dollars so that we know where we'll be at the end of the 5-year period. So in the current year, with the capital carry forward, we would need to appropriate $53 million towards capital projects. And these are typically areas that we don't have bond capacity for, that we, like IT, general government, currently police and fire do not have bond authorization. So those are the type of areas we look at using general fund dollars towards. Any questions before we move to the operating section? Okay. The next section is our general fund operating, and this is the portion that's being used towards one-time operating costs. We have a department called non-departmental that typically includes items that benefit the city as a whole that aren't specific to a department, or we also maintain small reserves. We have a fuel reserve, a utility reserve that we can pull from, and a printing reserve if need be. But again, it's been a few years since we've actually used those reserves. If they do not get spent, they simply fall back into the general fund. But any new appropriation that would be detailed the day of the budget briefing is in that number, as well as decision packages on line 33. Those one-time decision packages that are funded with general fund are reflected in the 5.8 million there. And then we also have an airport enterprise fund. Currently, the airport fund has numerous capital projects planned that the general fund is actually one of the grant match people in the mix there. The majority of them, though, have FAA grants. If those grants are not received, those just simply fall back and get rebudgeted again in the following year. But the majority of that truly is for those capital items, although the airport fund currently, I think it's about 73% now funded on the operating side, and the general fund is actually subsidizing a portion of those operations as well. We have on line 35 and line 36 fund, I apologize, it's the insured liability is our risk fund, Fund 737. We have an additional fund amount going in there to boost up the fund balance in that. Based on the last actuarial report we received, we are self-funded in risk and uninsured liability, which is our environmental risk fund. Those are both, we are self-insured, so we do have a one-time dollar commitment that we're putting into those as well. And then, of course, line 37 shows the planned total, which includes the additional payment to PSPRS as well as the portion of the employer contribution funded with one-time dollars. And we always have encumbrances at the end of a year, so line 38 represents the appropriation to bring those encumbrances forward of operating budget that is not yet spent and flows into the following year. So the total one-time operating is $42.4 million for a grand total of $96.8 million, leaving ending fund balance of $107.6 million. And then, of course, that will roll forward to the top, and the projections pursue all the way through to year 5. And this projection ends us at $87.6 million. We currently, in our financial policy, we have a 4-month operating reserve requirement. That would equate to, thank you, $82 million. So we're slightly above that. But again, this is assuming we spend every dollar, which we typically don't. Those dollars flow back into the general fund. So we very conservative projections when we're assuming we're going to spend every dollar by year 5. Any questions? Okay. And then the next slide just shows of that $107 million, the reserves that are split out, how we would split out those reserves. So lines 43 through 48 show our appropriated reserves. So when we would bring forward the proposed budget, those would be the reserves that would be built into the total dollar figure, that 38.3 million, I apologize. Line 49 through 55 are actually not appropriated reserves. These are designated reserves. These sit in our fund balance, but we have designated them based on language in our financial policies, as well as some restricted reserves or assigned reserves through our domestic violence funds, court and judicial enhancement funds, weapons citing agency, and red light funds, that we track those balances and we make sure that they stay separate from all the other general fund dollars. Okay, so that would be our proposed one-time projection for the beginning FY 2020-21. And this next line, we tried to visually put this on a slide. And I don't know how helpful it is, but what it's showing is really that I don't want to call it a bucket, but it's like showing a bucket in gray, blue, and red. And it's showing how each of what makes up that $107.6 million, the ending fund balance we're projecting at the end of 2020-21. And that $37.7 million is that appropriated 15% contingency in our council reserve contingency, our council contingency. Those are considered unassigned because it's really up to council throughout the year. If there's a need identified, it requires council approval for those to be used. And then the assigned are those items that are set aside in our fund balance but are not appropriated at the end of the year. Those are assigned balances. And then we have those, of course, restricted balances that we talked about on the prior page. But this really kind of puts it in a nutshell what that 107 million is made up of at the end of the year, what that reflects. I don't know if that helps, but any questions on that?
So Mayor, just to clarify, we started out the year with 180 million. What did we start the year with as far as?
We're estimating about 172 million at the beginning of 2021 or ending 1920.
And your plan on this current budget then has, by the time this year is over, about $107 million. So 65 million is allocated to the budget.
If every dollar was spent, we would have 108 million remaining.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's the case every year though, isn't it? As we project now and then we don't spend money and then, so every year
Comes back
we get a big boost.
Yes.
What was so we end up more closer to a level thing rather than a bump and a decrease every year, correct?
Yes, and actually, thank you, Mayor. On the very next slide, it actually shows in a bar graph our projection, and it shows that our actual ending fund balance at the end of 18-19 is $189 million. What we've spent, what we're projecting we will have at the end of 1920 is $173 million, because again, it's one of those where we don't spend it all, it carries forward, but that would be what our projected cash balance is. And you can see our 1920 projection, kind of looking into 2021, last year was 102. So that's kind of how it looks because of the cash flow nature of the one-time funds. And then, of course, assuming we spend everything appropriated, what it would look like by year 5 to ensure that we're within our financial policy.
Mayor, what's driving that is the large Intel project? I mean, what's driving the vast majority? You're going from 173 approximately to 108 this year. And then next year, you're down to 91. I'm just curious what's dropping off when you're looking at.
So through the Mayor, Councilmember Orlando, I'm kind of going back to these pages here, but starting on line 10, these are the things that are appropriated that we would anticipate appropriating to draw down that balance if every dollar was spent on all those economic development commitments, on all of those general funded CIP, on all of the one-time operating, it would leave us with 107.6 million.
I understand. I agree. I got. Let me rephrase my question.
Okay.
So in FY18, we left the year with 189 million. This year, or excuse me, 1920, 173. 2021, 108, and then we're dropping to 91, 86, 93. So we're obviously, there's some revenue streams that are not coming in, and then we have a large delta of activities coming out, right?
That's not in that number, though. Through the Mayor, Councilmember Orlando, it's because the downturn's built in, so our one-time revenues are a little bit lower in those years. So it's bringing down, I guess, the amount available to appropriate, and also the commitment of our PSPRS is built into there as well. That's slightly bringing that down over the next 5 years.
Okay.
Does that help? Did
No,
that
that
answer the
makes
question?
sense.
Okay.
But yeah, you have a lot of revenue coming in the last few years.
So it also seems like that the reason that we have 173 at the end of this year versus 102, and again, your statement continually through this is, that's because we're not spending it all. And that's why that 71 million delta is because there's 71 million that was built in for more spend, but again, we're just not spending it. So there tends to be a little bit of an uptick every year, because I remember over the years, we always kind of have this movement of the leftover dollars unspent to move on to the next 5 years. So that's kind of where there's that disparity is usually often seen. Would that be correct?
Yes, through the or Vice Mayor Lopez, you are absolutely correct. As you can see, in this year, we're building, that 173 million is really cash out the door by June 30th. And then how much more appropriation needs to be spent on those general funded capital projects? When we looked at the detail for 2021, we're anticipating over $40 million in appropriation, general funded capital appropriation carrying forward into the following year and adding to that general funded capital balance.
Okay, got it. That's the missing piece. So the 40 million be pulled over, which will make that a little bit higher. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Okay, we're shifting into the proposed 10-year capital improvement program, and we have the detail of the 10-year capital program. Corey's going to come around, or Matt, and hand those out. Mayor, would you like me to proceed? Okay. All right. So these are all the areas on the screen that that we actually budget capital projects in, all the various functional areas. I will tell you, this is an extremely collaborative process. We have involvement from all of our departments that come to the table. I think this year we did 2 CIP coordination team meetings where we come to the table with all the proposed projects. They go through their projects, and across the table, they're looking at how one project's impacting the other and where the priorities might be when we're looking at how we can lay out the 10 years and properly fund it, given our revenue resources. So it's a ton of work, and I'm just so proud of our departments because I can't tell you enough how much they work together on this process. I know through our budget kickoff discussions, there was a lot of priorities that were provided by all of you, and we really made an effort to go back and have those conversations within our CIP coordination team and with the city manager as well, in looking at making sure that we were building those into the 10-year proposed plan. So I don't plan on walking through every one of these projects, but I did want to let you know each section that we are, oh goodness. Yeah, it does kind of click forward. Each section in this list gives you a little bit more detail this year because we actually showed all the funding source that make up each individual project. But we will jump over to this list here in just a minute. I have a couple slides, excuse me, that will put the 10-year capital plan into perspective for everyone. First of all, of course, on this slide, we have our proposed capital improvement program guidelines that were presented to the CIP coordination team. Again, maintaining existing infrastructure was a huge priority again this year. We want to make sure that our amenities across the city are quality for our residents and our businesses, as well as our infrastructure in our water, wastewater area. Finishing our planned construction of streets and parks has been a priority every year, and we are so close to having that done. Limiting new projects that add ongoing operations and maintenance is obviously one thing that we're monitoring all along to make sure that we can pay the ongoing, and addressing public needs was a big focus as well. Things to know about the proposed 10-year CIP. So The proposed CIP represents all funds and is just under 1.2 billion, the 10-year plan. That's 227 million more than the current 10-year CIP. But as we go through some of these sections and you see some of the projects that have been added to the plan, and we'll talk about how we were able to fund them, I think you'll see why it has increased. A lot of it is the focus on maintenance. The proposed CIP for 2021 is 148.3 million. And of course, when we bring forward the proposed budget, it's just the first year that you're legally adopting. And that year is 37.7 more than the 1920 adopted. And again, as we go through each section, we'll explain the projects that are driving that up. With any capital plan, we do have the need to borrow. We are planning on a $42 million general obligation bond sale and a $57 million excise tax revenue obligation sale in 2021. That's part of the capital plan, as well as we were able to accelerate or add projects to the first 5 years. And this is by using general fund balance and impact fee loan repayments or system development fee loan repayments instead of increasing tax rate to fund debt service. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, but we do have quite a few receivables that the system development fee owes the debt service fund because we had to build a lot of these projects as growth was happening in our water and wastewater area, some of our parks. We had to get some of that built and that infrastructure in place. And so our property taxes are funding the principal and interest on that. But we're to a point now as we get closer to build out that we have less and less growth projects. So we're starting to be able to use those revenues as another funding source into the debt service fund, which is, again, a really good place to be in the city of Chandler. And we used additional capacity from the increased assessed value while lowering the primary tax rate. Because if you recall, when Matt went through that, the 0.87% or 0.87 cents per 100 of assessed value is dedicated to paying the principal and interest on our general obligation bonds. So we were able to add a little bit more capacity by not lowering that rate. So this slide shows our proposed 10-year CIP, and it is built into the state laws right now that we have to maintain no more than 10% of our principal and interest on our bonds as our fund balance. We cannot exceed 10% of our principal and interest on our bonds. So it's a balancing act as we're looking at each year and we're trying to figure out the timing of the projects and figuring out our bond sales and how we're going to support those projects. It is a balancing act, but you will see our 10-year plan is balanced, and that black line shows the 10% value, and the blue line shows our projected debt service fund balance. And so that already shows the levy coming in and the principal and interest going out and what that balance that remains each year, and it is below that black line. So we are balanced for the 10-year plan, which is great news. And then another conversation we wanted to make sure you were aware of before we went over the detail of the plan is our general voter bond authorization. This has been a big topic for all of us, but it is that, again, reminding everyone that the bonds paid by our secondary property tax, and the last bond election we had in the city of Chandler was back in 2007, which projected projects with no property tax increase. That was pre-recession. So over time, that authorization has lasted us as we've had to spread those projects out over time. And you can imagine how things have changed over time as well. So things we thought we needed back then might have changed as we move through the years. But the majority of it has really stuck to the plan. Minimal bond authorization remains for public safety and none for water wastewater. So this is really kind of where we're at in each of those bond categories, this authorization. And of course, we don't sell bonds out of any of these categories unless we have the levy or property taxes to pay the principal and interest on those bonds. So it's kind of, really timing out and making sure we're not driving a property tax rate increase on when we can use that bond authorization. But we looked in our 10-year plan and we wanted to give you an idea of when we believe, based on the projects that are laid out here, when the authorization would be exhausted. And what we're seeing is Park and Rec would be used up by 2027. We're seeing streets, the 66 million in authorization by the time we get through all the projects up until 2025. Then we would need to have additional authorization to continue past 2025. We have fire and police. Of course, we're out. We can't sell bonds for less than 5,000. So the 1,000 doesn't help us there. And the police is a very small amount. Typically, those projects exceed 1.5. So we actually don't even have anything utilizing bonds for police until 2027, until we get more authorization.
And Dawn, I'm sure there's an obvious answer, but tell me again why we don't have dates on some of these, that they've passed, they're not authorized, the museum, the library, tell me. We've got dates on 4, what's the rest of them?
Yes, Mayor, we don't have additional projects in those other categories.
Okay, thank you.
And really, it's one of those where we're doing some research with our bond counsel to see if there's any leverage for us to be able to shift some of that authorization and add it to another category. I think there's some pretty strict rules about mixing because of the voter language, very specific. And of course, with the museum, we were able to build a project that came in under what was anticipated years and years ago. So whether we use that 5.9 will just sit there until any future time. It never expires. But we'll continue to research with our bond counsel if there's a way of shifting that. If it's kind of a like category, there may be some wiggle room there.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councilmember Orlando.
Thank you. So Dawn, do you have a chart, I might have seen this before, where it shows on our CIP timeline what we have bonds for and then what we don't have bonds for that's still in the CIP?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, that's kind of what we wanted, what we were trying to do here. The detail of what they're being used for is in this updated 10-year proposed CIP plan. In order to do, we can certainly, if you look at the projects that are being used all the way up to 2027, it's anything after that year that we are completely out of authorization. So it'd be anything that's on your list here using Park and Rec bonds under community services that would run out by 2027.
So, okay, just I want to try and decipher this. So you got general bond funds, okay, I get that. Library bond, municipal, general fund, and then you got GO bonds. So how do I determine which one of these here are something we need additional dollars for? Additional
Through the
bonding
mayor,
for?
Councilmember Orlando, great question. This is all general obligation bonds. So when you're looking at the list, it would be anything that says, like for instance, under building and facilities, you see library bonds. We're using up some interest that is still sitting in that fund. But as you move through, I might have you just turn to page, actually the back of the first page is community services. And you'll see on that, when you go down the list, the GO bonds, those are the line items that are drawing down the park and recreation remaining authorization. And if you look at all the projects that have appropriation up until 2027, those would be funded with this remaining authorization. And then we would need more to continue past that point. Does that make sense?
So if we had authorization, would it be able to pull bonds in? I mean, pull projects in? And depends on the tax rate and all the other stuff too, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, we got $1.2 billion worth of projects here. And you only have, what was that last chart? $175 million worth of bonds? Whatever that number was, I can't.
I'm trying to follow you here, but what I might do is take you to
$40 million worth of remaining authorization. And you got
140 million.
140 million, excuse me. And then you have 1.2 billion in the CIP.
That's correct. So let me take you to page 7.
Okay.
Go to
so
page 7 of the long sheets. Okay? It gives us a summary of the different types of revenues that are funding the capital plan. It includes current revenues or fund balances in green out of different funds, police forfeiture, highway user revenue funds, LTAP grants, vehicle replacement fund. But in the gold section, do you see that? In the gold section are all the various general obligation bonds. We'd be planning on using general obligation bond proceeds towards those projects in the gold section. And that's what's drawing down each of these categories: streets, stormwater, park, and so on. Those are the totals, summarizing all the projects from above.
Councilmember Lopez, did you have a question?
No. So, Councilmember Orlando, so if you do look at that funding type, again, these GO bonds, there's a lot of them, there's variable other ones. General fund even pays for some of that. So that 1.2 billion, part's covered by the GO bonds, but some's general fund, some of it's the enterprise fund. So that's why you got to look at column funding type, right, to see where that's getting paid out of. FAA grants, ADOT grants, right. So, but it all for 10 years comes out to 1.2 billion.
That is correct, yes. And on page 7, it has all of the governmental funds excluding enterprise funds. So outside of the governmental totals on the next page, you've got solid waste, water, wastewater, and airport. Those are the ones that are self-sustaining. Their fees that are earned in those funds pay the debt service on those bonds or those capital projects.
Mayor. And you say self-sustaining, although there is an asterisk on the airport because we do have some general fund that does transfer, just.
Yes, except the airport. There is a subsidy. You're correct. Thank you.
Mayor, I have a quick question. So we have bonds, we have general fund dollars. We're challenged with the revenue that's coming in all the time. You do a fantastic job of managing that. Why would we not use more bonding authority for these SIP programs versus general fund dollars when we're chasing PSPRS, when we're chasing this project over here, and general fund projects, just for the 7 people that are watching?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, your question, I believe, is why we wouldn't sell more bonds and use proceeds since the interest is so inexpensive. It's a balancing act in regards to our tax rate and our assessed value.
Okay.
So if we sell more bonds, the tax rate has to go up. And right now, we didn't change the tax rate. So our cap, really, it's whatever that calculates in the levy, that's what we have available to pay the debt service, and we're constrained by that when we're building our CIP. So it would have to increase taxes in order to sell more bonds sooner. We have to time that out very carefully based on our current rate and our assessed value projections.
Good, that's a perfect time to change the channel. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Any other questions I can help answer? Okay. All right, so the other thing we wanted to talk about are our enterprise funds. Since we're always talking about the general obligation bonds and the interest and everything, part of our 1.2 million proposed 10-year plan are our enterprise funded projects as well. And we manage those funds individually, separately, and this does not have airport. This is really our water, wastewater, reclaimed, and solid waste. They run independent of each other. We don't put general fund dollars into those funds. Everything that happens in those funds is paid for by the rates that are charged to the rate payers in those areas. So we did want to talk about, there's a lot of work that goes on in projecting our infrastructure needs, our operating costs in water, wastewater, reclaimed solid waste. John Knutson and his team does an amazing job in projecting out and making sure that our infrastructure in those areas remains quality. Of course, we want to continue to have safe, clean water, working wastewater facilities, and so on. So with that, we have actually put together rate projections in those areas. And what we're seeing for water, we'll start with water. The top part of this shows the fund balance that we are currently holding in the water fund and how it's being drawn down over the next 5 years, and what we're anticipating for rate changes over the next 5 years. And we typically look at our rates every other year. We don't do rate increases every year, and in many cases, we hope that we don't have to do them at all, obviously. But in 2021, we don't anticipate any rate increases across the board for water, wastewater, reclaimed, and solid waste. In 2020-21, we are going to be initiating a cost of service study. It's a big undertaking with our team and our utility team. And it is, we bring in consultants and we look at all of the different water tiers, our customer tiers. And it is, it's a really strong look at making sure that the rates that, or let's see, the burden that each area, the residential, the commercial, the industrial, and the multifamily is putting on our water system, that they're paying their fair share or their portion of that rate, that it's an accurate representation of that. So the cost of service is a very intensive study that we anticipate running through the 2021 year. And right now, preliminary projections are that we would need about a 2% increase by 2021 and a 2.5% increase by 23-24. That's still maintaining a 20% operating reserve. We've estimated some impacts from our Intel partners. We've added additional maintenance and rehabilitation in our water area. And there's some very large filter replacements that are a big cost about mid-year through the 10-year plan in the first 5 years. On our wastewater fund, you'll see the drawdown of the fund balance. And in this case, again, no rate change in 2021, but we do anticipate an 8% rate increase in 21-22 and 23-24. And again, this could change as we go through the cost of service study. Something could change that, but we again are maintaining our 20% operating reserve based on our fiscal policies, Intel estimates incorporated, but there is significant facility maintenance incorporated. And that's, again, they get their reviews of their facilities, and all of those projects are planned out in the 10-year period and beyond. Our reclaimed only supports the operating side. We don't put capital reclaim projects in there. Those are actually still incorporated in wastewater. So our reclaimed operating shows the support for the actual operating rate that people are paying, the rate people are paying for reclaimed water. We do not anticipate a rate increase in 2021, but then 8% in 21-22 and 7% in 23-24. And that still maintains the 20% operating reserve, operating costs only, implementing conservation, messaging to our users, and advanced treatment is in the latter years of that plan. It's not shown in the first 5. And of course, solid waste, there's been a lot of conversations around solid waste, but the big change in this area, we do not anticipate having to raise rates in 2021, but we do anticipate a 6% by 21-22, and a 5% by 23-24. We currently only have a 10% proposed fund balance, and we are recommending an increase of that to 15% in the upcoming year, FY 2020-21, given all the volatility in that market. Any questions on our enterprise funds? At this point.
Any increase of questions? Councilmember Rowe.
Yeah, just one question. Typically, you provide us with a nice color bar chart that shows how these figures will add up against other communities. Too hard to tell at this point, maybe?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Rowe, we do have the information from our most recent year that's online currently. We have that out there already, but everyone's working on their rate plans right now. So we don't know what's going to happen come July 1st. It'll all come forward with the operating budget, but we can display cities that will actually tell us what they're doing and what's in their proposed budget. We will capture that and hopefully have that by the budget briefing timeframe. It's a little preliminary though, but you are right. We do those. We show the lineup with our other valley cities. Mm-hmm.
And then you also usually show us after the budgets are passed so we've got a projected comparison and a real comparison after July 1st.
Yes, Mayor, we do that as well. Thank you.
And Mayor, Councilmember Rowe, too, since we're projecting 0% increases across the board, unless somebody else is looking to reduce, then we're going to look even more favorable if other cities raise. So we'll know that, as Don said, as we go forward. But for next fiscal year, we're proposing 0% in all 4 enterprise funds.
Okay, so we're going to be walking through just at a high level. We're not going to go through every project. But we did want to just point out some of the projects that are featured in our 10-year proposed plan. And some of these we're highlighting based on discussions that took place at our budget kickoff this year. So overall, and I don't think we have a category for fire, which I guess I missed that. So we do have fire department on, it should be on here because one of the proposed key projects in the first 5 years is the Fire Station 2 that's in here. That should be on here. I apologize for that, fire. We also have community and regional park improvements listed here. Our regional park development is one of those, it used to be called Tumbleweed, but in working with kind of all the unknowns around all of those regional park needs, we're really putting aside kind of a lump sum of dollars that will be decided as we work through the master plan and everything else and how that will be spent. So we're just simply calling it regional park development, but the dollars are built into the capital plan, which is great news. Wind Park, Veterans Memorial Park Phase 2, Snettinger Sports Complex, and Lantana Ranch Park Site are some of the more substantial projects that are put in the CIP. Remaining arterial streets are listed there, just 3 remaining, and some other street projects also listed that are very important coming up in the first 5 years. Plus the LED upgrade, streetlight conversion, and Fry Road protected bike lanes. And then we have quite a few technology projects. That's a big focus as we look at being the most innovative city. And of course, so much work is going on in this area and it's ever changing. But a big focus in making sure that our departments have what they need, working with our new CIO. And the airport, this is just 3, but there are so many projects listed under airport that you will see that are rehab to a lot of the runways. We just listed the one on the extension, but there's many, many maintenance projects that are included in the plan. Okay. I keep trying to grab the clicker. So this is the point in time. Well, I will point you over to the 10-year plan that you have in front of you. And the listing is sorted by our governmental funds first, beginning with building and facilities. It shows the funding source for each of the projects, and if there's more than one funding source, those are reflected. But it shows the details of the first 5 years and a total for the first 5 years, and then the second 5 years are rolled up. It's really, we're just kind of focusing on the detail there, but of course, when this comes forward in the proposed document, the detail of all 10 years is reflected, even though our code actually requires us to only budget 5 years. The city of Chandler's always looked out 10 years, since I've been here anyway. So under building and facilities, again, I'll mention a big focus is maintenance, but I'll kind of have you look through that list to see if you have any questions on any projects there that we might be able to answer. Okay.
Council, any questions? All right,
Okay.
go to the next.
Oops, did you want to say something? All right, information technology is the next section, and we have about 7.3 million over the next 5 years. All of those are funded with general fund dollars. You can see all of those listed. Significant efforts going on there, just upgrading all of our infrastructure and mobility, trying to add more mobility for our employees. And security is a big focus in IT as well to keep us safe. Turning to page 2, we have our community services projects, and they all fit on that page. The funding sources for community services are general fund Impact fees, in some cases, we still have a few growth projects left that are identified in our infrastructure improvement plan. We have some grants that are used here, as well as general obligation bonds that are anticipated. And like I talked about, the very first project listed is the regional park development. That is the one that has $20.9 million in the first 5 years and will be looked at as the park master plan gets completed on how that will be spent. We've got our final community park, the Homestead North. We did leave Mesquite Groves Phase 1 in there, although that could change as the impact or as the master plan is completed, but that is one of the parks that was identified in our infrastructure improvement plan and is fully funded with impact fees. So that's part of the plan and why we're collecting those through our permits. Maybe worth mentioning.
Is there a time when we need to use, again, the impact fees to do this? I know this is kind of pushed way back there, but what's the timeline on impact fees with that?
Mayor, the timeline, the various areas, there's a 10-year, typically there's a 10-year time frame from when you collect the permit fees to when you need to spend them. And in this case, many of these fees were still in the correct area, I guess, for use of those fees. That is something we monitor on an annual basis to make sure we're in compliance. You're welcome.
Mayor, is there anything, well, you know what, I'll wait till the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm. We have quite a bit of maintenance money built into this 10-year plan as well to make sure our existing parks are well maintained as we move through the years. We've got the Veterans Memorial Park with general fund dollars. And there is a library master plan also included in the first year.
Oh, Mayor. Focusing on the Veterans Memorial Park, the 2.2 million there, is that for the entire project?
2.1 million. It's like 6 from the bottom.
Just says phase 2. I don't know if that means,
Right.
originally it's supposed to be 3 phases. I'm sorry, go ahead, Marcia.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, yes, phase 1 has already been complete. I believe that was originally planned for 3 phases, and Mickey's sitting out here. But but we did squeeze that pretty much into 2 phases, if I remember right, as we went forward with phase 1. So that's why it's only listed as phase 2. But that should complete what was planned for that Veterans Memorial.
So what would the impact be if we move that into this year?
So through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, we would need to know probably which project you would like to push out and that would allow for that, or it's.
You're taking out a general fund. I mean, we have
We could,
180 or 170 something million dollars. I mean.
Right, and so it would just be additional cash drawdown on the general fund if you wanted to move that up a year.
I'd like to take a look at moving that in for this year. We're losing a lot of veterans. We've lost 2 solid former mayors that were veterans. And all I'm hearing from our veteran committee is when this thing's going to be built. We're getting older. And I think, my personal opinion, we owe it to them to get this as soon as possible. Particularly another downturn. That's what happened the last one. Gilbert missed out on their memorial. So I think we need to, council, at least I'm advocating we move this up this year so that we could actually show our veterans that we're making progress on, number one. And number two, I believe a lot of the VAs and the American Legion organizations are also talking about moving it up, and they want to be a part of it. They want to actually be a tour guide. They want to actually keep it clean. They want to be a part of the maintenance. So I think there's no additional, well, there might be minimum O&M costs, but if we're utilizing their labor, I think it could be a win-win for everybody. So I'd like staff to take a look at that.
Councilmember, can you forward those conversations to Andy so that he could also, the interest on their parts to do those things, so he could kind of look
Andy,
at that and monetize them?
Andy, I'll give it to you, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
So.
But that helps us make the decision you know, with that statement, if he could actually meet with them and see what commitments they can make, if that's possible or not, or
No
it's a
worries, I
beer
just-
conversation.
Yeah, no problem.
Mayor, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you all want us to take a look at moving that forward a year, provided that we can get with those individuals and make that work, and then bring back a recommendation at all-day budget briefing around that. Is that correct?
Well, at this point, we have one council member recommending.
Right,
that.
that's
So
what
there's been
I-
no discussion here. It's just a recommendation.
Okay.
Council, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll jump in. I kind of second that. I'm looking at a couple, do an evaluation on some other ones that might be able to push out within the same area and/or some other items that may not be as urgent to push out just 1 year. You know, either other plans to buffer that general fund impact. But I do agree with Councilmember Orlando. I definitely would like to see that brought in a year, personally.
And do you have any of these? Is that just a general recommendation or
General
anything that you
recommendation,
would
but I
like to
mean,
see
I-
pushed out?
I think
I
we
mean,
need maybe have a discussion back on, you know, maybe one or couple. I mean, I don't know how urgent it is, the library master plan. It's not a major one, but I mean, if that can push us out a year, is that a big deal? Is there anything planned for that? You know, a couple other ones, the irrigation system probably needs to get done. Just looking in that existing bucket, so it's all kind of contained within there. Just a couple maybe evaluate to buffer it. I know it's probably not going to come up with the 2 million, but something to possibly buffer it if we push out a plan here or there just by a year.
Would,
Sure,
Maybe we can
we'll
help.
take a look at that.
would this be something that maybe we could even have the Parks team, if there's interest here on council in doing this, have a subcommittee present to them and help with that, or?
Well, yeah, it's exactly what the Parks and Rec Board would be good ones to get involved and see what they think that would be able to shuffle around. I don't know, and with the staff, of course.
So I'm hearing two recommendations here. Council, what's your? Council member.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish this was a conversation we were having in 12 months. I don't want to wish my life away, but there is a lot. I feel like whatever's going on right now may take a whole year to begin to correct itself. So, so I'm bearish on the future, at least for a year. The memorial thing is a drum that I've beaten. You've heard me over and over again. It was parking garages, and now it's a memorial thing. So I don't know if 12 months makes the difference for me. So if it's really important that wait a year, I'll listen to staff. I just as soon have it done.
Okay.
Mayor,
Council member.
since it's a park, can we bond it?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, we certainly can, but it impacted the tax rate if we bonded it,
It impacts, okay.
the overall tax rate. That was the big balance here in trying to figure out maximize use of other revenues, and we got pushed ourselves right up to where we could borrow.
Bring it up. I think, Mayor, I'm sorry, good.
Unless it was a bond already allotted, right? So just to,
No, because we still have to sell those and then we pay them back. Just because it's allotted, we haven't sold them.
but I'm saying that, because there's funds, just an example, I'm not saying this is what's gonna happen, but again, this is part of the three-card Monte that you all can do, because there's, yelled at for mentioning this one, so I'll mention the other one. The Lantana Ranch Park site, so that's a bond out further, but I mean, that's also a bond. So if that was transferred to the Veterans Oasis as a bond instead of a general fund, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's through the mayor, or Vice Mayor Lopez, except in the first year, it is impact fees in the first year, and that's where it gets super tight. It would drive.
Oh, I see what you
And
mean.
if you're looking at the bond-funded projects, look down 2021. Right now, we have a portion of regional parks bonded. We have a little bit for existing neighborhood park improvements. And
Yeah, I didn't want, I
Then it
wanted
goes
to avoid,
Sportsplex.
yeah, I wanted to avoid Sneaker. That's what I was gonna get yelled
Mayor,
at.
I-
But that's right. But you know what I'm trying to say there is
Yes,
that, you know, there are
I-
some other bonds that maybe we can.
Yeah, so council,
That's small.
are we okay with, we've made a recommendation. I think there's several council member that are for that. Let them do this and then get back to us
That's
and
what I'm
see
saying.
if it's possible, rather than us
Yep.
making this decision.
Agreed.
So it may or may not happen. Let's come back to us with seeing what it would look like to move this up a year.
And Mayor, and I agree 100%, thank you. If we need some one-time dollars, come back and see what that does to it. I mean, just, take some, instead of having 107 reserve, we have 105, 104, whatever that number is. I mean, I'm okay with that because I think it's important to send a message for our veterans
Yeah,
and the
understand.
community.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember Wong.
Yes, I second that. I think we will just rely on you to see if that's possible and if, see if any fund that's available or is there's any way we can make it happen earlier. Okay. Thank you. But if it's not, I think we'll understand that.
Yeah. And we're also not messing with, again, our commitment to structural balances of one-times and ongoing. So we're not interested in lowering that amount, again, out of, if it puts us into a spot to where we shouldn't be spending that money.
Okay,
So look forward to hearing back from you.
okay.
Continuing, council? All right.
Moving on to cultural development on the next page. There's a few projects budgeted under cultural, our newly formed department. We have Center for the Art Improvements, downtown redevelopment. Hopefully we can get back to some normalcy there and start to work on that again and open it up to art goers. We have downtown redevelopment
Mayor.
programs, AJ Chandler and Wall Street improvements.
Councilmember Stewart.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the downtown redevelopment? Just tell me a little bit more about that.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Stewart, those are dollars that are used to provide maintenance in our downtown. And of course, as downtown has expanded, there's more and more things to maintain. But this is where our director, Kim Moyers, draws from this for various kind of visual type things. Marcia could probably give you examples of how it's recently
No,
been used.
I'm aware of those things. I just wanted to just be clear about the budget. This is a general fund investment, a continuing investment into downtown
It is.
at $500,000, 600, and then 2.8 and 3 million into the future.
Those are totals.
Are they, I'm sorry,
Yeah. So Mayor, Councilmember Stewart,
second 5-year total is 3 million, first 5-year for a total of 5.8 million. Okay.
correct, but
I just wanna be clear.
they are for what we need for lighting upgrades along the colonnade, to take care of maintenance of the colonnade, to take care of, they've also included in the last couple of years what we have discussed around the ECAB and some of these other things that are coming out of those dollars. We also talked about, if we've been doing some additional cleanings and things down there, and I think the downtown is wanting maybe to put together another proposal. These dollars are set aside so we can use some of those. We do look at the balance that's sitting in there every year, and if we don't need a full $500,000, then we won't ask for it the next year. So we're always monitoring what's still left as well.
Thank you, City Manager.
Yeah. Through the mayor, Councilmember Huang, that is correct. But these are maintenance items that happen on an annual basis and are funded out of that. And Kim, and I don't think Kim is here, but she could certainly speak to the type of things that she's pulling out of those dollars for. But it is to maintain, it's for the maintenance on our downtown area. Okay. Okay, so moving on to fire, This was an area that we made some pretty significant change in the rebuild of Fire Station 282. This is a needed rebuild due to the capacity kind of bursting at the seams there when it comes to calls. So we've actually been able to accommodate that in 2021 and 21-22, but it is all general funded. They have no bond authorization, so there wasn't a whole lot of other revenue source that we could use to fund a fire station. And so we really had to look at ways of kind of shifting into bonds or shifting, maximizing use of impact fee funds, whatever we could do to try to get this into the first 2 years. And we were able to accommodate that through our 10-year plan.
The mayor, this goes back to my question I asked about a half an hour ago. So what you're saying here is there's no more bonds for fire. I mean, we're looking at what?
There's no bond authorization
Like
remaining.
this $1,000, literally $1,000. So everything past, let's see, so if we have a successful bond election, would some of these, if most of these items be on that bond election versus keeping them as general obligation / general fund? That was my question, I guess. I'm asking a different way.
Want me to get
Go ahead.
through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando. That is something that I believe the permission was given for a citizen committee, so all of those bond funded projects would be reviewed and prioritized. But potentially, yes, many of these that are currently funded with general fund would have the ability to shift to bond funded, but again, weighing the tax rate and the assessed values to make sure we're not, depending on what the will of council is.
Got it. Okay, that's what my question earlier. So you're looking at this potentially about $25 million here, actually 30 million, I guess, could be used roughly. I'm just throwing up numbers out here at the last, from years 2, let's say it's from 3 to 5, that type of potentially be bonds.
Potentially.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, that was my question before, I guess,
In the
rephrasing
future.
it.
Yes, in this capital plan, you'll notice in the last or second 5 years, we are anticipating use of bond proceeds. There are some needs that we pushed out. There's some needs on Fire Station 284 as well, in anticipation, hopefully, of having some authorization by that time.
Got it. Now I know where to find those numbers. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Dawn, again, I'm just thinking through something I thought I heard you say earlier. Even with that, there's authorization, but we still need to determine when we can spend that based upon secondary tax to be able to pay the interest on those, right? So we can seek authorization, but we still cannot spend them until it matches our model for debt repayment.
Mayor, that is correct, depending on council's will. We're constantly balancing to try to minimize an increase to the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So in balancing that out, depending on what the will of council is, we can certainly take the tax rate up and get that additional capacity, but each year we're really careful about trying to maintain taxes
Great, thank you.
based on direction from mayor and council. Yes. Okay, moving on. So turn the page. We are now to the police department. And there are a few projects here, and again, very little bond authorization available, but they do have some radio equipment needs and some body-worn cameras. These are some of those items that we would really love to see in our equipment replacement fund, but it does require an ongoing contribution. And at this point in time, we don't have that opportunity. There's not additional ongoing to fund that. So we have actually, these are new in our capital plan in order to ensure they have the replacements they need over the next 5 years. But you'll notice that there are general obligation bonds for some pretty large projects in the second 5 years that, again, we would anticipate through a bond election to be able to do those projects in the future. Okay. Public Works, Streets, and Transportation Policy. There's a lot of projects here that continue on to this page, next page, and the third page. So in just kind of walking through and hitting some of the highlights, there's a lot of funding sources in this area. We can use highway user funds. There's grants that Ryan Peters, as well as Jason Crampton, work very closely regionally to try to maximize the dollars in this area. We've got general obligation bonds, we've got some general fund used in this area, and we still have impact fees that are also used in this arterial street impact fees.
And Mayor, I just might add to that. So as you all are completely aware, we are working regionally on the Prop 400 extension of dollars. And if that were to pass, this would look completely different in terms of those projects and their funding sources on past that date. So just keep that in mind, but these are definite needs, and much or all of this has been submitted as part of the regional effort in developing that new plan.
Okay. Many of those projects I highlighted on the slide for the first 5 years, you'll see here the final arterial projects. And please, I'm going to just kind of take you to the second page. If there's any on here that you'd like to discuss, we can certainly stop and do that. But this is an area that certainly has some significant dollars dedicated towards our streets. Maintenance, again, is a big focus in this area, making sure we maintain our pavement index.
Mayor, I think it's very extremely important that we keep this maintenance up and then continue, even go beyond getting, that maintenance, because again, that's the first visibility if someone comes into our community and they see potholes, and that's not a good sight. So I like that idea. So, but I do want to focus on the Alma School. Jermaine, I know city manager and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. I don't know, Marcia, things are going so fast. I see the Germain Road is this year, which is great, the widening of that. And then we're looking at potentially finishing the project in 24, 25. Now, the way this comes out, are we looking at like July of 24, or are we looking at the whole year? Or June, June of 24, we're looking at the whole year to finish that down to Queen Creek. And you get back with me on the answer. It's not a big deal to look at now, but.
The bottom, yeah.
And then my second question is, we were hoping to get some grants or some matching dollars on that. Is that still in the works? And what's the chance of us getting that to be able to potentially move this up?
Right. So Mayor, Councilmember Orlando, so we did actually receive some grant dollars for Alma School. To make it simpler a little bit, some of those were moved into a project we already had a contract on one of the bigger arterial projects, but that did allow us to look at Alma School, and there may be still options to move that up as we get through Prop 400 and some of these other discussions for those last phases.
Yeah, the only reason why is, this council had made some promises to the residents out there, and we want to keep that promise. So as quick as we can get that promise kept, the better off we're probably going to be.
Certainly understand.
Thanks.
Mayor? Thank you. I'd love to get some background on the Gilbert Road Phase 2. And I just want to get some clarification on how fast you think that project's going to go. And that was paid for by bonds and grants. The school district has, are they helping? Are they helping with that project? I know we're widening Gilbert Road south to create some safety for that area. Are they helping with that road project?
Yeah, so Mayor, Councilmember Stewart, yes, is the short answer to your question. So for the portion that's adjacent to the school property, they will pay for that widening. The stuff on either end and what we had already previously planned southbound, we will be paying for. So, but yes, is the answer to your question.
And
Thank you.
that grant allocation is what's representing that school portion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're just whipping along here. Go to page 7, and again, this is where it summarizes each of the funding categories that are being used to fund all the governmental funded projects over the 10-year period. Staying within our general obligation constraints of our 10% balance in our debt service reserve. And then if you turn to page 8, we start with our enterprise funds, and the airport has numerous projects that span into the second page as well. A lot of it is maintenance. There's some aging infrastructure out there that needs some attention, and of course, Chris and his team are working on getting grants to supplement this area so we can move forward on some of these capital projects. And certainly see if I can answer any questions you might have in this area, or we have our resident airport expert, Josh, right here as well. Oh, Chris is here. Oh, and Chris, of course. There
So
you go.
Don, a quick question. So
Yes, sir.
these amounts reflect the total, or what has been the small percentage if we're able to get grants that you have in here for these projects?
Yeah, each of the gray lines, Mayor, shows the total by project, by year. So for instance, the third project down, rehabilitation of taxiway C, our airport operating represents really the cash, the general fund dollars that are going into the airport fund to pay that match on the grant. And the ADOT grant is with it. So wherever you see airport operating, that's our general fund.
Okay. That would be like our 5 or 7% match on a big project. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor. Mhm.
And Mayor, if I might add to that, as Don mentioned earlier, these projects are outlined here, but if we do not get those grants, we will not move forward with the projects. Through the mayor, Councilmember Wong, that is correct on a number of these. Some of them we may know, but others we have to go in and apply, and then it's a competitive process as to what's funded, and we don't know that most of the time until after the budget's already been adopted. Yeah. Yeah, through the mayor, Councilmember Wong, I will tell you, it varies year to year. And with everything going on this year, it certainly may vary, both at the federal level and the state level as well. So I just really can't answer your question sitting here today if all of them will be funded. It's our best guess and what we are applying for. And since we apply and then it's competitive, the thing is they may pick one over another. So we have to have that local match available for whatever project is ultimately picked to be funded, either at federal or state level. That's why there's so many listed. Mhm. Yeah, but again, if we don't get the grant, we will not move forward. Mhm. All of these? Chris is like, yeah, I'm thinking maybe 20, 25% if we're lucky, somewhere around that number is what we, but again, if it's so competitive, so we put all of these in there and then, what falls out, but whatever falls out, we have to have listed or we can't move forward with the project. Yeah. Yeah, mentally prepare for about 25% maybe on a good day.
Okay, so moving into the Public Works Utilities Solid Waste area, you'll notice we do have solid waste operating funds, which are the rates from our solid waste ratepayers. But there are improvements, solid waste service improvements, as well as Paseo Vista landfill and Wi-Fi at the facility out there. Really, those are the only projects we currently hold. Oh, goodness. Okay, I got a new Apple Watch and it's listening to me right now. I'm not sure why it went off. I apologize for that. Haven't quite figured out. Goodness. Okay, moving right along. Here's what I found. Public Works Water is the next section on page 10. The water fund, of course, we maintain various water plants across the city, and this is an area that, like I mentioned, John Knutson and his team have spent a lot of time and studies analyzing the plants and trying to determine the amount of maintenance needed in various areas. So this area in 2021, it has increased from what we had planned on doing in 2021 previously. We've shifted additional maintenance into the first 5 years. So it's one of those areas we're really trying to focus and make sure that we get our plants running in a good quality manner. But that is built in there, and there's a lot of detail behind each of these water treatment plant improvements and production facility improvements that are behind these numbers because they are fairly large numbers as well. But you will see in this area, water bonds, again, the ratepayers pay the debt service on those bonds. Water operating, that's coming right up, that's really the cash balance out of the water operating fund from the rates. And then there is a small grant portion that's also included in this fund that they're going to be applying for. All right, any questions? All right, so I think we're on the last page, goodness, page 11. We have the Public Works Utilities wastewater area, and again, this is another area of focus on maintenance of our facilities, so you will see the 2021 year has increased. The water reclamation facility improvements has a $21.7 balance in there. That's significantly higher than we had anticipated in 2021, but they have identified various projects needed at that facility that we did move up to accommodate those requests. So any questions on the 10-year proposed plan?
Mayor. Just a question here on wastewater. I know we're doing a survey the next year, I believe we said. I guess my question too is Intel's a large user of our wastewater? I'm assuming they're still a large user. Is that correct?
I didn't hear.
So if they do this recycling plant, which is a great thing for our country or for our environment as well as for Intel's industry, is that going to have a huge impact on our structures? And should we be thinking of that now? And I just don't want to go year number 2 or 3 and boom, hit a huge tax increase or rate increase because you still have a fixed structure asset to keep and maintain.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, that is an excellent question. We've had so many conversations around this. There's a lot of unknowns when it comes to Intel. We have been working closely with staff at Intel and built in our best estimate in the wastewater operating fund on what we think the impacts of that plant opening will have on our overall operations. I would tell you they are behind in opening it. We also, I think the original capacity in which they could process is being re-looked at. It's probably not going to be able to process the amount that they had originally anticipated. Those are some of the more recent conversations. So when we're looking at it, we're not anticipating it to have as big of impact initially as we thought it was going to have on our overall operations.
Okay.
So,
I guess my next question is, and again, thinking out loud, if there's excess capacity, could that capacity be utilized for other communities or even the tribal, and as opposed to helping us keep rates down?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, I am going to ask our Public Works Director, John Knudsen, to come up and answer that because he is constantly very knowledgeable and constantly working with Intel on some of these things.
By the way, he was prepped for this answer, so he had a couple minutes to.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Orlando, as Don mentioned, we do keep in constant communication with our Intel friends, and they are working very hard to complete the plant. They do have some construction delays that they're dealing with today. So that plant is not to be operational probably another 4 to 5, 6 months. It does operate today, but not in its full capacity. So they are testing and doing some other things. The long term for that plant is going to be kind of unfolded as they become knowledgeable of what the plant will cost them to operate and what the benefit of operating that plant will be for them. We have talked about using some excess capacity of that plant to also benefit the city. So those conversations are ongoing, but until they can get the plant operational and fully understand what the price tag to operate it is, we won't know much beyond that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Again, I just don't want to be able to come to say a year from now or 2 years from now and say, boom, we're going to jack rates up this much. If there's anticipation and we can't get the capacity, is there a way we could stair step this and obviously look at those type of things?
Well, as we're all aware, Intel is a very quiet place when they're planning. They don't share with us a lot, but we do We do communicate with them all the time, and they've told us and promised us that they're going to give us absolutely as much time to adjust as they do their planning as they possibly can. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for us to acclimate to the new future when that plant goes online. And we actually look at it as a benefit, to be honest, because the plant itself, it'll be one of two in the world like it, and it'll be able to do some pretty amazing things for us if we can team with them to do some of the things that we're thinking about. So the ability for it to process the water and then potentially return it to our wastewater stream to actually improve the water quality in our reclaim system is kind of what we're talking about.
Which actually may have a negative impact on the rates as well, potentially, right?
It's a.
I mean, a positive, a downward trend.
It could.
Okay.
But we're looking at it to be a win-win when that plant does come online, and there will be a balancing act of exactly how we bring that in. But anything that we do certainly would be gradual, I promise.
Okay. Oh, that's okay. We'll watch you on that one. Thanks.
All right, Council. Any other questions related to our budget session? Seeing none, the gavel is raising.
Whoop,
Oh,
Mayor.
City Manager.
Mayor, sorry. Yeah, so before you bang that gavel, I just need to make sure that a couple of questions I definitely need direction on. One is on public safety retirement. Are you good as proposed today with the plan, knowing that depending on how the economics come out of this COVID situation, we can hold that payment and definitely have some more discussions before it's actually sent?
And really, we're committing to a path, but that path, depending on what happens next year, we can alter it like we have done. So really,
every year.
At this point, we're committing to a path, but we're committing to a year. I'm in favor of that. Councils, the Clyman's weighed in.
I personally.
Yeah.
Oh. I thought you already weighed in, Council Member.
Yeah, on the PSPRS, I just want to make sure I have an opportunity I missed an opportunity about 20 slides ago. And so once Marcia finishes, I'll circle back to me.
Okay. Councilmember Wong.
Yeah, I personally think if we can pay off everything as soon as possible, I would be all for it. But of course, we do need to taking into consideration if we are able to do it or not. But for me, I'm a little bit more forward. Go ahead, pay as much as you can.
Mayor?
Councilmember.
Thank you. So there's a lot going on here. Obviously, we have a lot of things that we need to talk about. There's a lot of moving parts with regard to everything that's going on. I feel confident in staff's ability, especially our CFO, and giving us the right budget. I mean, you've done it year after year, and I know you'll do that again. I would like to see maybe a good, better strategy as it relates to what could come down based on some of the reports that are coming from our Economic Development Department, some of the GDP slowdown, some of the quarterly impacts that are going to happen. I think we're doing the right thing and moving forward with our discussions as we know there will be a slowdown. We know that there'll be a slight impact. I want to see a little bit deeper dive into what a 15 to 20% impact is going to be, and ask your department heads to start taking a stab at that before we come back the next time. Because I think this budget is going to look tremendously different in 2 weeks. And if it's not, fantastic. But I think in this instance, we want to plan possibly for the worst, and we can work backwards. It'll be a lot healthier for, I think, the organization. So,
And specifically, you're okay with this recommendation?
as it stands today, but I want to have the opportunity to reevaluate.
Yeah.
And Mayor, I was a proponent last year of this as well, and I'm still a proponent. And I think the GO, if the bonding of next year, if this occurs, will have a big impact on what we do, obviously, on a go-forward basis, to be able to do both infrastructure improvement as well as trying to get the PSPRS brought down. So I'm optimistic about that. So hopefully, again, the frustration, I think what all of us is, and we shared this several dozen times, is it's just a moving target. And if it moves again next year, council, I'll be honest with you, I will not be for it. I think we need to if this moves again, despite our best efforts, Dawn, and I know you and your team's doing a great effort with the city manager, but if this moves again, and the frustration part about this, if we could redeploy this money to do other things for our community, I think we'll take a hard look at that next year. So coupled with the bonds, coupled with this target moving again, I'm okay with this year, but again, I'm a little frustrated if we're here again next year and it moves again to target. So, fair enough?
So we're good for that. What other decisions do you need from this?
I
night
just
from
want to
us?
make sure, Mayor and Council, that you're okay with the recommendation of slightly rolling back the primary tax rate.
Okay.
I mean, it's-
Yeah, nobody likes to talk about a tax increase in an election year. But again, I think it's never, is that what you said? But again, my only concern is looking at the long term. If values start dropping down, it goes back to our previous discussion. We just talked about the wastewater. You're going to have to dramatically raise taxes or cut dramatically programs.
Well, wastewater, sorry,
No, I'm using that example as you have a point in time where rates could spike up because you either want to cover your total cost or you drop out program. That's my point I was trying to
yeah.
make.
And possibly the other side of that coin is that there's a lot of people unemployed right now. And any tax cut that we can provide for them, because
I get it, council member. I believe me, I do.
So I'm hearing a yes on that one
Everybody's
as well.
Generally
right.
there. All right, I just want to say thank you, Mayor, Council. You had a lot thrown at you over the last 3 hours. Really appreciate the feedback, and we'll see you again on April 28th, or 24th, sorry.
We do have the key budget on the screen there for you to review, and we are to the point that we're actually pulling together the proposed budget. We're working towards that effort, so it is a pretty tight timeline at this point forward, just to reiterate that. Thank you, Mayor.